Welcome to Desert Wanderers, produced by Salt and Light Radio. If you're new here, we bridge the gap between you and the person in the pew next to you. I will be interviewing priests, religious, and laity in our local Boise diocese, asking questions that'll help you navigate your vocation and help build community wherever you are with whatever resources you may have. Let's build the city of God together. Good morning, Father John Moseier. How are you?
Natalie. I'm well.
It's so funny. I was talking to Ramiro up in Saliluz, and I was saying he said that he lived with you for a short period of time or something like that.
Yeah, we've had overlap a few times. Yeah, what a great resource for like you and the whole ministry here. It's beautiful.
Yeah. It was so funny though, because I said, oh yeah, he's, Father John Moseier, he was in the Marines and he had a wife at one point, and then he became a priest, and it's just such a cool story. I'm so excited to see it. And I was like, the funny thing is, I think he knows absolutely zero about me, but I know a lot more about his life.
Well, hopefully we discover some of that maybe. You guide the podcast, but I love learning other people's story. You hear your own story enough, you're like, oh.
Yeah, you're like, and that's what I like about this podcast is I always told people, I'm like, yeah, if you hear me talking, like something's wrong. Like it should really be the other.
What a great format too, and they're outside even this ministry. Just you look in the secular world. This, what do they call it? Long form podcast is a way of sharing news where you can actually have a dialogue and not a sound bite and not a little snippet. Although those are helpful, you actually have a conversation. So I like
Pints with Aquinas, which I'm sure you've heard of with Matt Fradd. But the reason I like the long form podcast when I started my podcast is I realized everyone has about a 30 to 45 minute pitch that they've practiced, they've rehearsed, and like kind of questions that go around their story. And then after you get past like the 40, 45 minute, then it gets really good because they're like, oh, we're still talking and I'm having new questions be brought up. And so I think that's
let's go there first. I use that. I don't know what language. Are you recording now? So we're good to go. Perfect. Yeah. So the sometimes in pastoral care, sometimes you have no idea what the person's coming in to see you about. You don't know. There's a name and a phone number and a time booked to visit. Sometimes you have some indication because they may have told the person who booked the appointment, if they told you or they told one of the team, hey, I'm coming in to talk about. So I'll often say to the person, I need you to ask the doorknob question first. That's not organic to me. Someone else told me that, and I said, that's brilliant. So here's the doorknob question. The doorknob question is, you're booked for an hour, let's say.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to meet at 9:30, and you meet at 9:30. And then at 10:25, they're getting up to leave, and they touch the doorknob, and they look at you and say, I have another question. Yeah. And that's the one they really wanted to ask, not all the other stuff.
Yeah,
so you guide the podcast. We'll go wherever you want to go, because, as again, my story, everyone has a story. Mine's mine. You have yours. All your listeners have theirs. God bless them.
I know.
If it's useful, we'll talk about it. If it's not, let's talk about what you think the listeners want to hear. You have a sense of that.
I've actually had a lot of people ask me to have you on. So I have
God bless them.
Yeah, I know. I think the interesting thing, and I think the perspective that you have that makes people want to hear your story is because you've lived two different vocations, right? Most people live in marriage for their whole life, or they're a priest for their whole life, right?
It's most common the case.
Yeah.
Most commonly the case.
It doesn't mean that things like your situation don't happen, or people that have, things happen in their life and they choose other. You mean, sometimes I've heard this actually more frequently than maybe your story, which is like a woman who lost her husband and then she decided to become a religious. So I've heard that.
That does happen as well.
Yeah.
I mean, in the history of the church and in the contemporary moment, also true. Although I'll say this, and some people who, quote, have heard my story, they know this component of it, which was, when I entered seminary in 2014 for the Diocese of Boise, we're all sent at that time to Mount Angel. Now, nowadays, the men go out to St. Peter, St. Paul, beautifully so, in Minnesota.
Oh, really?
In Minneapolis.
Okay.
Yeah, great seminary. But when I entered in 2014, we were still all heading to Mount Angel.
Yeah.
And so I arrive on campus in August of 2014, and I'm 49, kind of a gray-haired guy. and we have our clerics because I was entered into theology. So I have clerics on.
Yeah.
And I'm walking around campus. Man comes up to me who's about my age, a peer in age. And he says, "Hello, Father. What class do you teach?" And I said, "I don't. I just got here. I'm trying to figure out, where Aquinas Hall is or where. I don't know. I'm just got here. I just moved in like yesterday, so I don't know." And I said, "What Father class do you teach?" Because he is dressed in his clerics as well, and he's someone in his 60s. I couldn't discern, but someone late 50s, 60s. And I said, "What class do you teach?" He says, "I don't. I just got here yesterday as well." And his name ends up being Mike Rizzo, now Father Mike Rizzo, Diocese of Orange. He's down in Huntington Beach. And he and I became like instant best friends at seminary because there were two of us in a similar path in life where he had been married 27 years to a beautiful woman, Rosemarie. And Rosemarie had died unexpectedly, and he discerned for 2 years and entered seminary. And so he and I became close friends in seminary during those years I was there, the 5 years I was there, because we had a similar experience. He actually was one of the presidents of U.S. Bank.
What?
Living a
crazy.
very well-compensated life, a lot of materiality, but he said after losing Rosemarie, that's not it. He wanted to really share his faith in a different way, in a very very practical, hands-on way, so priesthood seemed to be an invitation. He discerned it, and he discerned properly because he's a wonderful priest. But what surprised me, Natalie, is it wasn't just Mike. There were probably 15 of us.
15?
15 out of 100 who were over the age of 40.
Praise God. Like, seriously, I mean, we always talk about, like, how there's a shortage of priests and stuff, but, I mean, like, obviously the Holy Spirit is working through people's lives to have men who are going through this at, like, even at a later life or, like, making different decisions towards,
What you'll find is that call was always there. We use the language, and it's understandable we use the language, late vocation. "Oh, you're a late vocation." No, I thought I would possibly be a priest when I was 8.
Yeah.
And that was true for Mike. And for most of these other 15 men, these other 14 men, it was not like, all of a sudden I woke up at 45 and I thought priesthood. No.
Hey.
I thought that when I was 8, 9, 10. Usually altar serving was a common experience. However, as they discerned through their teen years and into high school, that was also true for me. I visited 2 seminaries when I was in high school as a junior. And it just wasn't the right fit at that time. As a 17-year-old, I visited 2 seminaries. This was back in Ohio, Diocese of Toledo. And
are you from Ohio?
From Ohio.
Where are you from?
Findlay, Ohio. A little town called Findlay, northwest Ohio.
My husband's from Mason, so right outside of Charlotte. Not Charlotte, sorry.
Cincinnati.
I went to college in right outside of Charlotte.
Yeah.
But anyways, he's right outside of Cincinnati.
Yeah.
We're actually leaving on Wednesday.
Go back there?
Yeah.
Great. The Midwest is wonderful. I loved it. It was a great upbringing. We can talk about that. Beautifully formed. But at 17 and visiting these 2 different seminaries, one in Ohio, one in Indiana, it wasn't the right time or fit.
Yeah.
So off I went to Marquette University, which is a Jesuit school in Wisconsin. I had an older brother there. I attend. A younger sister follows a year behind. So there were 3 of us there at the same time.
Okay, so I know of Marquette University.
Yeah.
Is it fairly medical focused?
It has a medical school, it has a dental school, it has a law school, so it does have that aspect, but it's probably offers more than 30 majors. I mean, at least It's a big school, 11,000 undergrads on campus.
What major did you get when you were at Marquette?
In finance.
Finance,
Yeah,
okay.
I studied finance and physics, those have to do with one another. Studied both, but my degree's in finance accounting,
Yeah. Okay, so you went to Marquette.
So freshman year, we segued then quickly into the story, but and I had also, along with potential serving the church as a priest as a childhood idea, I also had the idea of serving in the military as a child. Right?
Yeah.
Both were intentionalities or ideas as a young boy growing up. And I did all the typical young boy things, which was playing in the forest and Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, all that stuff, camping. Pioneering. I love that stuff. So as a freshman, I'm now 18 in my freshman year at Marquette. And just then, as is true today, there were world events happening, some of concern. But I had this 18-year-old view of the world, which was fairly naive. but I was very drawn to these individuals who I'd only met one in my life, and he was very different. And this has to do with the Marines. So I saw this parallel, and it's amazing how God works that out. But I saw this parallel as an 18-year-old between priesthood and service in the Marines.
I was just thinking that.
It was the same charism in the sense, the language a little bit different, but the same charism in the sense that their ethos was different. And the marketing efforts of the Marines back, this would have been, 1981, was very much on this notion. It's still true today. If you look at their most recent media, they push out for the 248th birthday of the Marines, 1775. You encounter a message around, we go do hard things for the benefit of other people. Or another marketing tagline, we go fight for those who cannot or will not fight for themselves. Wow. Very self-sacrificing. So unexpected, but happened coincident to that decision to enlist in the Marines, was the tragedy of the Beirut bombing, where 247 of them died in a terrorist event. And that was very moving, because here I am, a young kid in college, and I'm now in the Marines, and I'm observing this tragic event play out in a place in the world I didn't even know where it was. Beirut, Lebanon, where's that?
Yeah. And
some of the interviews coincident to that event on the evening news inspired me, because they were interviewing some of these young men my age, 18, 19 years old, who were in that tragedy, and just their way of reacting to the interviewer, the on-site media, their bodies singed and wounded, and they're giving an interview. And I thought, I want to be around guys like that. Whatever that is, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
So my recruiting officer said to me, well, we need you, but we don't need you today. So why don't you finish up at Marquette? This is when I'm a freshman.
Oh, okay.
Why don't you finish up at Marquette and then join the Marines? You'll be in the Marines while you're at Marquette. It's called Officer Selection, OCS, Officer Candidate School. So you end up going through your 4 years of undergrad, and you're commissioned the day you graduate, which is what most Marine officers actually end up doing. Only a small cadre come out of the Naval Academy and another cadre out of ROTC, but most Marine officers are commissioned upon completing their undergraduate studies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I did, and it was fantastic. So I was commissioned into the Marines, and then the needs of the Marine Corps, it's like the needs of the diocese. You go where you're told. You go where you're told. And there's someone using that type of language or idea, equivalent to a bishop, who says, here's where you're going. Some commanding general says, here's where you're going. And then off I went to a Marine Expeditionary Unit. And like the logic of the government, here's a flatland kid growing up in the cornfields of Ohio, as flat as this table.
Yeah.
And the decision is, what you need to do? You need to go to an Arctic skiing unit. You'd be perfect for that.
Arctic skiing.
Skiing in
Was it like cross country? Because you might be okay with that, but downhill might be a little different.
No, it's they're kind of a touring ski, so it is a downhill cross country ski combo. You can a little bit of both, because you're carrying a lot of stuff on your back. But off I went to that schooling and experience, and I'm shipped off to the mountains in northern Norway and different places in mountainous Europe to do our job, which was to be a military presence in that era.
How cool would that be?
It was fantastic.
I bet that was so awesome. I love to ski. So I grew up skiing, and so to imagine to just have a company be like, yeah, your job is going to be go mountaineering, basically.
Go do that.
In Europe. How old were you? Like 22?
21.
21.
Yeah, then 22 in December. So it was an amazing experience, and loved it, and shaped me in many ways, the experiences of those young men. Things we had to do, things we experienced, the decisions you're making, because now you're a young lieutenant, you're a platoon commander, you're making decisions that affect the well-being of these individuals. Military uses these phrases like the pointy edge of the spear, right? You're the point of first contact. That's where diplomacy gets carried out, is those young 18, 19, 20-year-olds. That's who's carrying out government diplomacy or U.S. policy, with a lot of oversight, obviously, a lot of mentored oversight. But it was a privilege. I loved it.
So what would you say, like, because you have had time in the military, especially, I think I'll say this, it's interesting. I've had friends in the Navy, I've had friends in the Air Force, and I've had friends in the Marines, and it's really interesting to see how all of them have similar threads of like how the system works, but they're very different in their mottos or how they act, like just their, like, how they act is a little different. They're like how they carry themselves is a little different.
It's a little different.
Not, I mean, not a ton, but there is just like subtle differences. But I would say what my question would be, when you're thinking about military life now compared to the priesthood, what were the things that part of your life prepared you for today?
It's a beautiful question, Natalie, and the strong parallels. So I can't speak for the other service branches other than with respect. But my only lived experience is through the Marines.
Right.
And what you learn from day one of your boot camp experience was intentionally traumatic. It's intentionally traumatic. You arrive at night, you're disoriented, 4 or 5 different people yelling at you. You can't figure out silly analogy. Pick that cup up, put it down. Pick that cup up, put it down. 2 different people, and you're being stressed because they're trying to discern, is this person capable of dealing with stress and chaos? That's before they start training you. They're just trying to select you. Can you even be here in this simple coffee cup environment? Make your bed, unmake your bed. What were the things that are parallel to your question?
Hold on, I just have one point. Yeah. So I had a really good friend in high school named Jack, and he would talk about cleaning toilets. Because they had to clean toilets in a certain way. And he told me, if you ever date a guy, you need to go to his house and you need to look behind the toilet where the bolts are, and you'll know what type of guy he is.
There's probably merit in that. Attention to detail.
Yeah.
It does. And
I was like, please don't come over and look at my bathroom, Jack. Please don't.
Well, usually, let's segue off of that, because to answer your question, what are the parallels? And cleanliness standards matter, or making your bed. Bed, really?
Yeah.
Yes. What you're learning those first chaotic days upon arriving into that experience, where you're left, first of all, you don't sleep, so you're fatigued and you're overwhelmed. What they're trying to get to first is to weed out those who have no hope of surviving this. And they evidence themselves pretty quick. Then the other thing is, you're learning an ethos, again, speaking only from the Marine perspective. I'm sure the other service branches have some aspect to this, is you're learning really quick this duality of it's not about you, but it's all about you. And what I mean is this. So you learn pretty quick. They're yelling at you or screaming at you. They're trying to teach you to make your bed. And you think, which consists of 2 sheets and a wool blanket. Make your bed. Do it this way. And you have so much time to do it. They don't tell you this, but you learn early on, a few bed-making experiences in where you make your bed, they rip it apart, do it again. You learn how to partner up with because you're living in these bunk beds.
Right.
So the guy above or the guy below, either way, the 2 of you realize real quick, hey, let's work together. We'll make this bed, then we'll make that bed, and we're done. With 2 of us doing this is a lot easier than the 2 of us getting in each other's way, circling around, in a hurricane of chaos. And then that spreads. That goes viral really quick. The guys figure out, hey, if we work together, this gets a lot easier, and they stop yelling.
Yeah. So
now, what does making a bed have to do with deploying advanced weapon systems? Nothing and everything. Because what you learn is, there's a method and a way, and teamwork matters. So the strong parallel, back to your question, is, in our life and faith, it's not about us individually, and it's totally about us individually. That duality.
It's kind of like when you just said that, what I thought of is like the body of Christ. I've always heard that, like, right, we have the saints praying for the sinners.
Right.
And like when you sin, it hurts the body of Christ. But then you have all these saints that are praying for all of the people that are sinning. And it's like this like kind of cohesive ball, I guess you would say, of like trying to, like, the ebbs and flows of like humanity, basically.
It would be the question of, and this may not resonate with a teenager or a person in their 20s necessarily, is the church says you should go to Mass. You should go to Mass. Church has taught that since the dawn of time, since the dawn of the church. Go to Mass. Come together and celebrate the Eucharist. You should do that. And a person could say, let's imagine a 12, 13, 14-year-old, Mom, Dad, I don't feel like going to Mass. Or a high schooler, I need to sleep. I don't feel like going to Mass. And the right answer is, well, it's not about you.
Yeah.
It's totally about you, but it's not about you. In other words, why? Because you being at Mass is the worship of God, and participating in the sacrifice of the Mass is for everybody else. And your presence there invites people into that same experience.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing by going to Mass. It's a life-saving exercise for you to go to Mass. Well, I don't feel like it's saving my life. Well, first of all, it is, because it's the real presence of Christ. But moreover, your exercise of faith invites others into that same experience. So it's life-saving for you to get up, get dressed, go to Mass. You're doing it for the others.
Yeah.
That's a different kind of responsibility.
Once a month, Father Nelson is doing a series on my podcast called Generational Catholicism. The first one just came out in November. And one of the things I really enjoy about this last one is one of the parents, there was a panel of parents that were interviewed in this. And one of the parents said that he had an experience where his parents were really strict about this. Basically, like, there was a vacation at one point that was like super awesome. They had like snowmobiles and like all the 4-wheelers and all this thing to go out and into the mountains and have fun for like a week. And the dad said, well, are you going to be able to get to Mass? And he's like, I'm going to be in the middle of nowhere. Of course we're not going to be able to get to Mass. And
Right.
He's like, sorry, you can't go.
Yeah.
He's like, a whole week of fun.
Yeah.
But because you can't get to Mass on Sunday. And I think it's really important for parents that, like, I don't think my family didn't do that. We used to skip Mass when we'd go camping in the summer, but it wasn't until later that my parents were like, oh yeah, like, I didn't know it was a mortal sin to miss Mass. Like, do you know, like,
Right.
That's kind of like
There are situations that develop. We can imagine if you're in the military.
Right.
You're not
Or
going to see
you
a
try.
priest. It's going to be hard. Things happen.
Yeah, or like,
But
say
the
you
idea-
try and your car breaks
but
down.
the ethos is
Right.
body of Christ. We are the body of Christ. So our participation matters.
Yeah.
It matters. And so what I saw, back to your question, in the Marines was this. It's the Rudyard Kipling, right? It's the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the wolf is the strength of the pack. And, it's this mutual coexistence that there is a pack because of the wolf, and the pack exists to protect the wolf. And that brotherhood, that fraternity in the Marines was so evident and strong. In fact, I'm going to meet up tomorrow with a dear, dear friend in the Marines. Goes back 35 years. That's a long time ago. And those many of my closest friends were at my ordination who I'd served with. And it was such a privilege to have them there, because we have this it's a military phrase, not to be ghoulish, but the phrase is same blood, same mud. Same blood, same mud. Means we are of the same blood, and we've lived in the same mud. And we have that mutual experience that bonds us in a way. Well, that's us as Catholics. Same blood of Christ. Yeah, same mud. We're born out of creation, willed into existence by God. Same blood, same mud. That's a Catholic phrase, if you ask me.
Yeah, I agree.
Marines may have co-opted it, but it's a very Catholic phrase.
But right. So then, okay, so you were in the Marines and
Right.
you were in Europe, and then what happened? Did you come back to the U.S.? And then
I
is that
did.
when
I
you
served 6 years. There was the final event in my active duty days was the first Gulf War, and when that ended, I left active duty to go then to grad school. And I had some options on grad school. I was fortunate that way. And the program that was most enticing and inviting was at Texas A&M, because they offered to pay for it, which is kind of nice for grad school, because I was invited to come be a instructor at Texas A&M, which has a big, what they call Corps of Cadets. It's there are the 3 service academies, or I guess 4 if you count the Maritime College. So you have the Annapolis and West Point and the Air Force Academy, and then you have, of course, Coast Guard Academy, and then the Maritime Academy. But there are these 3, they call them sister schools, so which is Texas A&M, VMI, Virginia Military Institute, and the Citadel. And A&M is the biggest of the 3 sister schools, in that it has, of the 50,000 students on campus, 6,000 of them are in this entity called the Corps of Cadets. It's huge, and it's beautiful. So I was invited as a...
So, sorry, before we move on, what is the Corps of Cadets mean?
Those are students who are in a they're not committed into the military services when they graduate. I mean, some of them will, that's their point, but But while they're at Texas A&M as an undergrad, they're in this very structured formation environment where they participate in the disciplines of the military life along with their academics, but they live this very structured existence. They're not just the freshman who shows up on campus or gets their own housing as a sophomore and lives their own life. No, they live a very structured life in dormitories with mentors and guidance. And for some, it results in many being these amazing contributors to society. But of that 6,000, there's a subset that actually get commissioned into the military and go on to serve in various branches. They do it well.
I think one of the things I can say about the military, I think one of the most attractive pieces is that oftentimes even adults, like even myself, structure is so important.
It's huge.
And I think when you have to be a college student and you have to figure out, like, I think even after college, because at least if you're a college student, you might not have a super structured day, but you at least have classes that you have to go to every week at certain times and whatever, right? And there's like a structure built into that. But I think as like a young adult, I struggled for a long time of like making an actual schedule or a structure of how I'm going to like do my day-to-day life. I mean, work helps with that too, but there's something beautiful in that it teaches you how to create structure and that there's this structure like built in for you. And I think that's really important for just anybody's life.
Well, I would say to any listeners, let's assume, and I'm pretty certain it is, you have many demographics you speak into. Let's speak now directly to those who are in that early in life demographic. They're teenagers, high school, college age. It's the audience that I think Father Nilsson resonates with so well. Father Nathan does the same. Chase Hazerel, Father Hazerel up at U of I in Moscow. They're speaking into that demographic.
Yeah.
And some of them, they've left home. They're trying to figure it out for themselves, and there's good growth in that. But I would offer structure gives you freedom.
Yes.
Structure actually gives you freedom.
Yeah.
And so for that listening audience, if you're feeling oppressed, I have air quotes up, if you're feeling oppressed because mom and dad gave you structure about the weekend, hey, be home by this time, don't go to that particular party, make sure you take care of this responsibility first before you go out. That's called structure.
Yeah. That's
actually very liberating because when you know the boundaries, you're able to operate within those boundaries with a great deal of latitude, but you know what the boundaries are. Our Catholic faith does that for us. Yeah. Why does the church teach what it teaches on relationships, marriage, preparation for marriage? And it is, the old prudish church. Nope. Those boundaries are very liberating because it expresses what is appropriate in a relationship and what's not in order to prevent woundedness and damage and harm that comes when you step outside the bounds.
Well, and I think that's very one of the things.
Loving.
Yeah. In my first podcast I talked about my story. And one of the things that I mentioned on there was the fact that if I was Protestant, I think there is not, like for myself, for my personality, there's not enough boundaries for me to be a faithful Christian. And I really noticed this pretty early on in my story. It's just like as a high schooler, as a like early young adult, I needed to know that there was boundaries and that there was like, when I learned about mortal sin, I was a junior or senior in high school, like, which is kind of mind blowing that it took me that long to learn about it. But it like rocked my world. Like I totally changed how I was living just because I realized, now there's like a consequence, like an actual like consequence that is tangible, that is like it affects me, not just like other people. So in a way, it's like the church puts these standards or these rules up, right? But I always loved the description that I can't remember who it was, but someone was like, well, if you're a parent, you're not going to let your child go play on the road. Like, they're going to be a boundary. You're going to put like
the
side,
history of our faith. If we look back to the ancestry in the Jewish faith, Jewish experience, why in their wandering through the desert are they given early on these 10 commandments? Why? Yeah. That's an expression of love. God says, do it this way. Do these things and do it this way. Why? Because that equals success. If you say, or if we individually say, no, I don't agree with those. I'm going to try to wing it myself and come up with, how does that turn out? And it doesn't. And so the church is not this, it is a, quote, rules-bound or boundary-defined experience. Yeah, that's very loving and giving.
Yeah.
That actually provides freedom of love once you know a structure. And so our catechism, 3,000 paragraphs in our catechism, why would people invest in that and do that? Why does Mike Schmidt do it in a year? Because when we understand boundaries and rules, we find freedom. Or within even those boundaries and rules.
Even so my husband, at one point, we were discovering, or we were talking about, we have family members that aren't married in the church and the consequences that come with that when you're a baptized Christian. And we were thinking, how unfair is it that the church is putting these parameters or whatever? And we learned about what happened originally. So one of the reasons that you have to be married in a Catholic church is because way back when, men and women would get married and they would elope, right? And then the man would be like, oh, I'm not married to her, and no one saw it. So then this woman is losing these rights, this protection of this marriage that she's already...
There's no claim on assets. She's destitute.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And so it's the reason that the church has these rules or has these things, even or structurally in how the church does certain things, it's always to protect.
It's always to protect, and that's a civil matter, the distribution of assets. It's also the sacramental. Holy matrimony is a sacrament. And what's that mean? Does that mean the couple is never going to fight? No, of course they may have disagreements. It's called being human, two imperfect people.
Yeah.
However, in that sacramental bond, in that nuptial bond, it's a covenant, and they're bonded and formed, and they can say accurately, I'm mad at you today. I'm actually very angry at you today, spouse, but I do love you.
Yeah.
And I don't resent you. I'm mad at this whatever decision you made or thing you did or didn't do or thing you said or didn't say, whatever. But I don't reject you. I'm mad. Well, that's the history of life and faith, is God never rejects us. He loves us. He can be disappointed. Oh, yeah. And we're going to live an accountable life for that. We're going to be accountable at the end, a particular judgment. But we don't undo God's love for us.
Yeah.
And so we reflect that same benevolence and totality of love in the marriage. That's why. If we explain it, people generally find, oh, well, that's a good reason. If we explain it.
I think that also the one thing about the sacraments is I think people underplay graces of sacraments.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
It's a true infusion of grace.
My aunt said this to me once when I was younger. I was saying, man, I wish I would have got confirmed as an adult because I finally get it. And she said, yeah, but what if the only reason that you're getting it now is because you were given the graces at confirmation then?
I tell the students that, those who I've been privileged to interact with both in Coeur d'Alene and Salmon and now here with the high schoolers at BK, getting confirmed doesn't all of a sudden guarantee you're going to ace the SAT, the SAT. No. It may bring peace. It may minimize some anxiety, but it doesn't guarantee, your entrance into MIT. Probably not. However, there is this real infusion of grace. It's a true sacramental infusion of the power of God into your life that does give you discernment. Yes, it does. Does that mean you don't make dumb decisions? No, it doesn't. No. But it means you are equipped in a way that someone who doesn't have that privilege just doesn't have.
Yeah. I also think when we're talking about graces, and I mean, this would be a good question for you. I'll pose it to you after, but what kind of graces you gotten from the priesthood. But the one I'll say is in marriage, one of the graces I've realized is I always had this fear growing up whenever I dated someone that they were going to leave me. I was always on edge that they were going to leave me. I had this giant fear.
Well, yeah, let's speak into that in a little bit. Let's speak into that because that's of interest to some of your listeners.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was always on eggshell. I always felt like I was too much. I was too loud. I was too exuberant. I was too athletic. I was too big. I was too I was just too much of everything.
Something not right.
Yeah. And I also, Cameron Frad has a podcast and she talks about all the saints are different and we're all given our personalities because no one saint should be the same, right? There can't be two Teresa or Teresa of Avila's, right? Or there can't be two Mother Teresas, or there can't be two Maximum Colbys or whatever, right? So anyways, I was still going through that, but when I met my husband, there was a point where I gave that over a little bit. But I do think that in marriage, even, I think the reason that fear hasn't come back in, and we've had a lot more fights than when we were dating, Sure. Because
now you're committed.
And we have kids.
There's
and
no
it's
undo here.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially with children.
With children. But the one thing I can say is I think the gift that the Holy Spirit gave through marriage was that fear is gone. Like, I know he's going to stick with me through thick
You're
and
all
thin.
in.
Like, even like I said, we've had fights, like real fights. There's been points where we've both been really lonely because we're like not being kind to each other because we're exhausted and hungry and whatever.
I don't know your story, and I don't know because we haven't had that opportunity to discuss that. My guess is you can be angry but not resentful. That's a big hurdle. Once you've crossed over into the realm of resentment, it's hard to fix.
Yeah.
What you're saying is generally a person in that moment in life, and God bless any experiencing that right now who hear this, is you're saying, I don't actually like that person anymore. I don't like them or I don't trust them. Mm-hmm. That's different from, man, I'm mad at you today for whatever it was. I love you, but I can be mad. It's kind of a bifurcated mental space to be in, but that's the beauty of the sacrament. When you enter into the realm of, I don't actually even like you as a person, that's a different space. And that takes some hard work. It's not hopeless. It just takes some hard work. Now that you mentioned marriage, I should probably go back to where we were.
Yeah. I have one more thing to say, though,
Sure.
for the listeners. I think this was really helpful for me, and I would like to share it, is that someone told, I don't remember how I heard it, but someone told me at one point, said that they were like up really late at night and their kids were puking. And they were just like, the parents were just like fighting at each other's neck.
Moment. Yeah.
Right. And he looked over at his wife and he said, this is the only person that I'd want to do this with. Like, there's no one in the world.
Great statement, right?
Like, this
sucks.
So
bad right now.
Like, I don't like you. I'm tired. Like, I mean, this is
terrible.
awful.
These kids are, oh my goodness.
And they're crying, and they had like 6 kids or something
this is
like
as
that.
Bad as it gets.
Yeah. And he looked
no
over.
One else I'd be here
he's like, yeah, there's no, and I think that changed a lot of my perspective. We were also going through sick kids. So it's hard, and you're at each other's throats because you're like, just give me the medicine. And they're like, you're just freaking out.
You're tired. Fatigue's a factor.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Food and sleep. Literally, I swear that can fix anything.
I share that with an individual may come into the confessional at time. It's not uncommon for a person to say, oh, I'm really mad at my spouse, my husband or my wife. And you don't ask too many questions in the sacrament of confession. At least you can ask a couple, but you shouldn't. First of all, it's not a dialogue or pastoral care. It's not that. And also, in respective to the forgiveness granted through that sacrament, this absolution, it's not necessary for the priest to know all these details. Is it? No, because he's, first of all, not the judge. That's nope. And nor is the priest the one forgiving. So you don't need to make your case to the priest. The priest isn't the presider making a decision. No, God grants that mercy completely when asked for, authentically asked for. But a person may say, well, I'm really mad at my spouse, or I've been judgmental, or what have you. The one question, if I do ask at all, will be around fatigue. How are you exhausted? Yeah. I said, well, that's a big factor in how you engage the day. When you're just in perpetual fatigue, particularly with little ones, or working 2 jobs, that some people's lives are incredibly hard and burdensome, and yet here they are lovingly trying to live their faith. God bless them. There's mercy in that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I also I heard this once too, and I think that gives me a lot of peace, is someone said, if you're so spread thin, there's no way, if you're so spread thin that you're at your bottom of bottoms, you can't give anything you don't have, right?
Your tank is empty.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for anyone that's listening, God bless you, and it gets better. I mean, I'm sure all of us, and I'm not out of it by any means, but we have ups and downs, and there's going to be good days and bad days.
It's hard because we could pivot on to studies or discussions around economics and income and the cost of living in Boise, the cost of living in Idaho, throughout the state, your broader listener audience, West Coast. It's hard.
Yeah.
So again, a loving guidance from the Creator God. Hey, take a day off a week. Take a day of rest.
Yeah.
Do that on purpose.
Right.
That's intentional. Why? Because He formed us. He knows what our needs are. He knows our capacities. And having that opportunity to step back for a day, even if it's 12 hours, to just not do for a day. Now, I'm saying that in the context of many who are in a 2-income household or 2 jobs to pay the rent and, afford the cost of living, children. I'm not saying
even
it's
just
so
children.
simple. No, it's not simple. It's very hard. But there's a lot of podcasters, you're probably one of them, that could say, it's intentional. There is a giving up. And
oh, absolutely.
there is a giving up in the stepping back. You are giving up to step back. there are ways to make it work. It's not an impossible situation.
Yeah. Again, we talked about this in like the beginning of my like first interview with my, like when they were interviewing me to like get to know the host. And it was very intentional for my husband and I. Like if you crunch the number, not everyone, but for us, we crunched the numbers, and the type of care that we wanted for our children was going to be more like, it was going to, my take home pay after taxes was going to be like $150.
Yeah.
So it was like, well, at that point,
what if I did
what
this
are we
myself?
doing? Yeah. Like, what are we doing? Why am I going back to work for $150? You know, it's like not worth it.
Yeah. It's so well said. I don't have that personal experience. I beautifully observed some young, like you guys, young couples up north in Salmon, and then here where there's husband and wife are making intentional decisions around one of them, mother or father. One of them is more available to the kids, either actually at home or with a very, very reduced schedule, so that they are in the majority home with their young ones, especially their little ones, under the age of 10. They are definitely in those kids' lives and in a very fulfilling, intentional way. No one else can do that like the parents. No one else raises those kids. Now, again, with the caveat to some of your listeners, if that's not your current scenario, don't feel guilted. It's not an accusation.
Absolutely.
That's a decision you're making right now. What I would encourage is the investigation you and your husband did, and many of these other young couples I know that did the math and said, hold on, what's this going to cost to put our young child in this care setting that's appropriate and safe, engaging, what have you, versus, well, what if we found a group of like-minded parents where we could share resources and supervision.
Yeah.
And maybe I cover the kids 2 days a week and they cover the kids 2 days a week, and we figure out how to combine our efforts to do that. Yeah. Now we have 8 kids under supervision, right? I'm making this scenario up. And they're all lovingly cared for with parents that we trust.
Yeah, and friends.
And friends. You know, and we make it work.
Yeah,
That's happening across the nation, independent of the Catholic Church. It's happening within the Catholic Church. But you're seeing a lot of parents make that decision to say, you know what? Maybe this 80s, 90s, early 2000s model of go, 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 in order to be fulfilled, I've got to check all these boxes. Maybe not.
It was actually really funny. I was watching a short from Brett Cooper with the Daily Wire, and she was talking about how there is this trad mom. She's a Mormon, this Mormon couple that has like 7 or 8 kids. Sure. Are going under fire from all these social media influencers because the feminists or whatever, they were talking about how she's so oppressed and one day she's going to wake up and see how awful her life is. And they're like, yeah, but she went in 2 years from 2022 to 2024. She had 1 million followers in 2022 and now she's at 8 million. So in 2 years she gained 400, like basically 4 million a year. Yeah. So obviously women are like wanting it. And I mean, I can say the same thing with like the recent election. I think people are just kind of tired, like even women. So I think Trump got like, was it 40 or I remember. It was a large percentage of women voted for Trump.
And Catholics. Yay.
Yeah.
Way to show up, Catholics.
Yeah. But the point is, I think, is like Kamala's whole thing was on abortion, like women's rights. And I think women were like fed up with it.
Because we would say that. And as a priest, I'm very self-aware. My brother at St. Mark's, Father Paul, great priest, great mentor, great priest. And all priests in the diocese, and I would suspect throughout the country, we won't segue on to the election and politics.
No,
it's exhausting for most of us. But what I would say, though, is we were speaking of the exhausted nature of our nation and even the traditional roles of men and women and how that became a consideration in the election. And then the point being simply this: the Church has this teaching since its inception around the sanctity of life from conception to natural end. Okay, that's not ambiguous. That's not ambiguous. When a political party makes the willful killing of the innocent a campaign platform, that's pretty problematic.
Yeah.
Because there are many things to care about in life, many issues and causes, and neither party, as many have said, were perfect. I was simple in my explanation to the parish because no priest should name candidates and say, do this, do that. Nope. Church doesn't get to tell you how to vote.
Right.
It can guide us in our discernment, but it doesn't tell us how to vote. What I would say is simply this, echoing the greats, St. John Paul II, St. Thomas Aquinas, simply this. All the rights that a person could experience, think of any right in this country or any right in any other sovereign nation, all the rights that you could experience are dependent on the fact of you existing in order for you to experience them.
Right.
So think of any right. And St. John Paul II said this beautifully. All the rights that could exist are dependent on the right to exist.
Yeah.
So if you deny the right to exist, you have by definition denied every other right. Then said simply, you can't be in support of a particular right and deny the right to exist, to experience it. So if you say, I'm going to promote the right of equal pay for equal work, right? That's a workplace right. Equal pay for equal work. But I'm going to make sure you never get hired.
Right.
That'd be incoherent.
Right.
I'm going to promote the right to immigrate or emigrate. I'm going to promote the right to do that. I'm going to promote the right for people to be autonomous and make decisions, but I'm going to deny you the right to ever make that decision.
Yeah.
That's incoherent.
I think the one thing I like about this saying is basically it's a slippery slope, right? It's the same thing with, so this is a kind of an interesting point of, I think, pro-life movement stuff is IVF.
Right.
And I think it was like, I don't remember if it was last year or just a couple months ago, there was the thing in Alabama. I believe it was Alabama where they had the big, huge thing where they wrote in a certain law about abortion. And then a whole bunch of IVF clinics were like, whoa, I'm going to like shut back. And I'm so disappointed because I think there was a lot of Catholics that were like pushing for that like type of speech because obviously there's problematic things with IVF.
Being that these embryos are conceived and then sit in nitrogen for
not only
frozen
that,
stasis
but
with no plan.
Yeah, and they might not ever, right? It's like a type of abortion because they might never like get used, right? It might never be implanted, right? And never have the chance for life. But it's also even more disgusting than that in a way because people can choose down to eye color in IVF like situations. They get a genetic like list and they can say, oh, I'm a redhead, so be redhead with blue eyes.
Another speaker has spoken on this, and I'm embarrassed I can't remember his name. But recently, I think it was actually a podcast similar to yours. And his argument was, well, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, right? It's the famous Shema from people of the Hebrew faith, Jewish faith, is Shema, to pray that morning and evening. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, all your mind. So when we say, and this is said with a sympathetic heart, I know personally a young couple who pursued IVF, but they did so out of a little bit of naivety because they so desperately wanted children and they wanted their biological descendants. So they're presented with a technology and an opportunity that would potentially allow for that, although it's risky. They would potentially allow for that. What this other speaker would say into that moment is, one, with great empathy and sympathy of heart for a couple who's open to life, obviously, trying to bring life in, but that it does result in a truth, which is in order for this procedure to be effective, you need higher probability. Well, you do that through multiple conceptions. And so you need to derive these zygotes, then assess those zygotes for viability in order to select those most likely to implant and be successful. But those who, quote, don't make the list are still fully human, mind, body, and soul, but they didn't make the list. So the parent, in their zeal for life, being open to life, are also then, in that same decision, placing this other group of conceived people, these children, into this outcast grouping that gets stuck in nitrogen chambers and held in stasis, frozen with no plan to be consumed.
I want to give some hope and some information. Some Catholics know about it. Some Catholics don't. It just depends. But one of the things that I did a huge deep dive after we had our son on NFP because I felt like I didn't have the resources.
Right.
Our kids are 14 months apart, and I'm so glad that we have our daughter. I'm very excited. She's just amazing. But And it's a huge blessing. But I was kind of mad because I was like, we're
Wow,
trying to do it right.
Yeah.
We're trying to do it the right way. And I don't feel like we have the resources. And so I went on this deep dive. But one of the things I actually found out during this process we went through, what's it called? I was going through insurance. I was looking at insurances and what like the medical profession pays for and what they don't, and what they teach and what they don't. And no one was talking about NFP. No one was talking about like the Marquette method, which is actually how I know about Marquette University. And no one was talking about all of these things. And then I realized I was doing some research on just like, well, why doesn't insurance pay for this? And like why they should, and how this is better for women overall. Like even if you're not Catholic, doing NFP is so much better for women's health than anything you can do.
Well, we teach it as a required course curricula in our marriage prep. Why does the Catholic Church ask you to take at least 4 months in preparation to carefully vet through this selection of partner? There's a lot of things you need to talk about, and
yeah.
We enter into marriage in many cases surprisingly naive about our would-be spouse, even if we've dated for years. But
yeah,
in the contemporary moment, it's quite common for people to decide, the most common argument being economics. Well, we moved in together. Well, now that's advanced yourself in a commitment you may not be ready for, and so it's harder to back out and all that entanglement. But the church teaches NFP because, one, it's organic to how God built us, which is in his design, but also here's just a statistical truth. This divorce rate for Catholics is lower than, but not significantly lower than secular society. It's lower, but not significantly lower. Separation happens in the Catholic Church. Let's say, I don't know the actual number in front of me. Let's say it's 30%, 25, 30%. Here's a measured truth. For couples that practice NFP, that separation rate is less than 5%.
Wow.
That's a fact. That just is. Why is that? Well, because NFP teaches a way of communicating and an intimacy of being that other practices don't. And so you're living it, so you know. But other parents listening to this know that, or couples listening to this know that. Yeah, it's work. It's an effort.
Yeah, but NFP is not necessarily like, I think people think about NFP as like just controlling how many kids and when you have them. That's like not NFP really. Like honestly, it's all about communication.
It's all about communication.
And not only that, but like what's your like status of your relationship? It's like a pulse on your relationship. Like how are we doing in all these other areas so that we can talk about,
And in this diocese, in the marriage and family life ministry that's part of the chancery, boy, is that well led. The leadership team of ministry and family life in this diocese, here's a quick shout out to them, because the resources they make available, the training on methods,
it's definitely getting better.
Information that is made available through us as a priest within this diocese to share with young couples inquiring or in faith formation for marriage. It's fantastic. We're very well resourced here to speak into that.
Yeah, I definitely think it's getting better. I also think when I was going through it, we were going to Mass every week, but I don't think that it's like spoken. Again, this is going to depend on parish to parish. The ones that we were going to, they didn't really talk about it. And when we went through marriage prep, it was like, oh, you're planning on doing this? Great. We'll just kind of like skip over that,
Not a planned topic of discussion, but you bring it to mind is, as priest, and I challenge myself, pointing to myself first, is, two areas I need to speak more frequently and very directly is marriage preparation and discerning service in consecrated life as priesthood, vocations, right? They're both a vocation. But speak very directly into that, because it can be awkward and, oh, no, I'm going to hurt some feelings. I said this recently at St. Mark's, where I'm privileged to serve. I said it this morning at morning Mass. I challenged the grandparents and parents at morning Mass, and it's morning Mass, so it's grandparents, just by time of Mass being 8 a.m. So I said, listen, here's my challenge. At Thanksgiving dinner, ask your 8, 9, 10-year-old son if they've considered priesthood. Ask them.
Yeah.
We say we're going to pray for vocations. Beautiful. We have this huge banner at St. Mark's that says pray for vocations. And there are these amazing ministry groups, whether it's Sarah Club or the St. John Vianney group, our altar societies, these beautiful prayerful groups that raise up in prayer, or actually are very provisional in the Men in Black calendar. Mary Lou Molitor puts out, all these ministries to promote priesthood. But my challenge is to the parents, are you encouraging your son to consider it? Are you talking about it with them? Most couples want descendants, open to life children. Of course, that's a promise they made at marriage if they were married in the Catholic faith, witnessed by the Catholic Church. But are we actually challenging and encouraging our sons to consider this? Mm-hmm. Are we doing that? Because Pray for Vocations is fantastic. Thank you. What are we doing about it? Are we promoting it? Are we saying, hey, little person, little grandson of mine, have you ever thought about this? Because that's not going to falsely motivate them into that calling.
No.
It won't. Because the vetting process, the discernment process is so mature and so well thought through. You can't just show up at seminary and say, well, I decided to be here, or my parents motivated me to be here, so here I am. And then 8 years later, you're ordained. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. I also think that's the same with like religious life. I actually have a cousin who was in religious life for 6 years, and she was going to be become
Final
a nun.
vows.
Yeah, she was getting ready
vows.
for final vows, and then she was just like, I don't think this is where God's calling me. And then she met my cousin Chaz, and then they got married and have 5 kids now, and beautiful. Going on 6, right? It's beautiful.
That's the beauty of, I say that to young ones, generally younger guys, but an older man as well, by the way.
And it doesn't hurt you, because that's going to help your spiritual life. That's going to help this, like the life of your kids. It's going to set everyone up for success if you do that and decide to
a parallel experience at seminary. I was there for 5 years, and in those 5 years, I had 3. They weren't all my classmates, but 1 was, and then 2 were in other grades, other class years, all discern out. And I remember maybe my second year there, a classmate discerned out. He was just an amazing man, just a very, very talented, very authentic man. He discerns out. I don't see him for 2 years, so now I'm in my final year. And he shows back up at Mount Angel on campus, and there's his wife, and they've got a little baby in a stroller. And I just think, look at you. Look at you. Perfect. This is where he's... But you're right. His formation... It was very additive and complementary to his life as a husband now. Of course it is. It's the same charism. That which draws you into marriage and fatherhood is the same charism expressed in priesthood. I find no difference between my life as a husband and my life as a priest. I mean, there's measurable ways it's different, but that desire for life-giving, for provision, for protection, it's the same.
Yeah. The last thing on the NFP talk is there's this thing called NAPRO technology. And when I was doing all my research, it's actually more effective than IVF. It's all about healing women's hormones so that they can conceive.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that if you're a Catholic and you haven't heard of that, please look into NAPRO. I think it's a beautiful resource.
I'll tell you this. I spent, Natalie, to that point, I spent most of my life in biomedicine. So I was on the engineering manufacturing side of biotechnologies like electron microscopy and something called flow cytometry, which is blood cell analysis. And then in my last years of work prior to seminary and then continuing on in seminary, I got involved in what's called CRISPR-Cas9. That's gene editing, right? Mm. So we learn every year. We're learning more and more and more on a rapid pace about the natural design, God-created design of the human form. And as we conform to its natural biological processes, you hear a lot of radio ads right now around these various therapies that instead of surgery, there's hormonal therapy we can bring to bear, or there's cellular therapy we can bring to bear, using God's created design for the human body, human form. Yeah.
You have a really unique experience as you've gone to seminary. So we just talked about this guy who discerned out of marriage and ended up getting married. So for you, it was kind of the opposite. So I would love to hear about how you met your wife and
we'll go back
that kind of score. Yeah. Go through that story and then how you got to the priesthood from there.
We'll buckle back into where we'll go back in time and grab that strap, that handhold. So I leave the active military and I transitioned then to Texas A&M. Because of the opportunity to be both a student and instructor, and the economics were brilliant because grad school for free is kind of nice. Plus get paid, right? Get paid. So that was awesome. So I get down to A&M, And I go through that program, and that degree program was dual-fold. It was, or twofold. It was a MBA, and then I was going to get a degree in Austria in a technical university there called Johannes Kepler. It's like the it's their equivalent of one of our tech universities here, very tech oriented. So I matriculate into A&M's MBA program, but then I'm also going to be a student in Austria, and that's a 2-year program.
Do you speak German?
I do.
Yeah. Really? My husband speaks German.
Yeah, I grew up with familiarity, not a speaker, but familiar, because my family's ancestry is all German. And then I went through an intensive language course in order to be in that grad program, because all the coursework was taught in German, and you're writing your papers in German, and that's their world. That's
right.
the world.
When you go to school in Austria, you're going to be speaking
it's in German.
Yeah.
But it was amazing. So I'm in this dual degree program, and through that I meet Jackie Flanders was her maiden name. I meet her in September of 92, and I knew I'd had this desire for marriage, because I, again, decided at 17 I wasn't going to pursue entry into seminary. I'd gone off now to Marquette, and I graduated, and now I've served in the Marine Corps these 6 years, and now I'm out and about. So I'm back at A&M as this grad student, and I meet her, and many of us in our story of our meeting our would-be spouse or come-to-be spouse it's some of them it's a Shazam moment, and some of them it's not as obvious, or you've known them for years. Well, in her case, as soon as I saw her, I said, "Wow, is she amazing?" I didn't know her, and just this beautiful, big-haired Texas, amazing girl with a beautiful voice in a statistics class, believe it or not, a business statistics class, and I stalked her for about a week,
How can I run into this lady?
How can I run into this woman? So it was, I won't tell long stories, because that's better over dinner, but I follow her into the elevator in this building we were in. It took me about a week to get up the courage to approach her, and it's only funny in her voice, because she was from Texas and had a little bit of that. She could turn that on and off. She could turn on that East Texas on and off.
Yeah.
So she turned it on that day, because I followed her into the elevator, and I said, "Jackie, I'm John. I'm in the business statistics class." And I sat like 2 rows in front of her, and she was 2 rows behind. So I say to her, "I'm in our business statistics class." And she looks at me, and she says with that Texas twang, "No." And I said, "Oh, yeah. So I asked her, I said, this is on like on a Wednesday. I said, something popular to do down in College Station, Texas, was to go, it's called two-stepping. It's not line dancing, but it's like polka, two-stepping.
Yeah.
Best way to describe it. But it's a very Texas thing. So in College Station, I hope it's still there, because it was a great place, was called the Hall of Fame. It was this ginormous dance hall with a stage, and they'd have live band on Fridays, Saturdays. It was a very popular thing for students to go out to the hall, as it was known, and dance. That was like a very safe date, because you're with hundreds of classmates and, hundreds. It was awesome. Anyway, I asked her to go to the hall to go dancing, but I don't know how to two-step. So I had to ask a couple of classmates, "Hey, can you, I don't know how to do this." So I got some tutoring on Thursday and Friday. But the fast forward in the story, I'd been asking my parents to come down to College Station just to have the A&M experience. And this was in September, and this is like game weekend, right?
Yeah.
And like a lot of big campuses, college football weekends are huge.
Right.
So they "Yeah, son, we'll come. Well, I've asked her out on Wednesday. Now it's Friday evening, and I've asked Jackie out for Saturday. And my dad calls, and he says, "Hey, son, your mom and I are decided to come down and see you this weekend. We're going to be there tomorrow at 2, Saturday at 2. Look forward to seeing you. Anything we can bring, because they're in Virginia at the time." And I said,
"Oh, so that's a long drive too."
Well, they were flying.
But yeah.
"We're going to be there tomorrow at 2. Can't wait to see you. Great, Dad. Great. This is Friday. So I oh man, because I've been asking them, and they couldn't do it. Now they are. No notice. So I like fake dial or practice dial Jackie like 3 times before I finally just man up and call her. And I said, Jackie, it's John. We have a date tomorrow. This is Friday night. And she says, like in the elevator, I know. I said, oh, yeah. So I said, here's the situation. Just as I told you. I said, I asked my parents, and they couldn't come, and I just got off the phone with my dad, and now they're coming. They're going to be here tomorrow. I'm sorry. And she's quiet on the phone, and she's there's a pause. It seemed like a long time, but it may have only been 10 seconds. And she says, let me ask you a question. I said, yeah. She said, can they dance? And I said,
what a woman.
What? She said, can they dance? I said, I don't know. She said, well, you and I are going dancing. They're welcome to come. And I said, oh.
Of course you're going to marry this
okay.
woman.
Well, I didn't tell her that, but that was like, check the box. How quick thinking, how comfortable I don't know this girl. She doesn't know me, but she's like, oh no, we have a date. It's happening. Your parents are welcome. And I thought, okay, that was very impressive to me.
Yeah.
I told her years later, but I thought, wow. So we...
I mean, that's impressive. Anyway, that's amazing.
So our first date was chaperoned. And I was... How old was I? I was 29. Our first date was chaperoned, and I was 29 years old. She was 24. And anyway, we get to the dance hall. End of story on this. We get to the dance hall. And my dad, my siblings and I have 5 siblings, we called Dad the Admiral. We called Dad the Admiral because he was very direct and stern and not a wishy-washy kind of guy. He was very direct, loving father, very provisional, very Catholic father, but the Admiral. Like,
yeah.
He would look at you when you're a child. He'd just look at you, even the girls, because I have 4 sisters. He'd look at you and he'd just say, stop crying. None of this lovey-dovey, oh, come here. No, stop crying. Just like that. And we would. Anyway, the Admiral and my mom show up, and I pick them up at the airport, and I hadn't told them about Jackie. I've only asked her out a few days earlier. We haven't even had a date yet, so they don't know about her. So I tell them after I'm driving from the airport to my apartment, they're going to stay, and I said, hey, listen, regarding tonight, I've asked a girl out. Her name is Jackie. And I asked her out earlier in the week, but I didn't want to not have you guys visit. So it's a little bit awkward. We're going to go on a double date together. You and Dad and Jackie and I. And my mom is cute. She's like, well, what is her name? And what is she like? I said, I don't know, Mom. I hardly know her. I mean, this will be our first date. My dad is, really? That's weird. And I said, well, all right, Dad, you're the one that showed up. Anyway, we get to the hall, and there's stand-up tables like this, and there's all these people, and there's a band on the stage, country western. And my mom and Dad don't have Western attire. They don't. It's not their thing. But so anyway, we show up, and we're standing at this table, and it's awkward because we went to dinner first at this little restaurant, and casual chit chat, a little bit about her background, and my mom's, of course, already trying to tell her stories about me.
Yeah,
shaming stories. Great, thanks, Mom. But we get to the hall, and we're standing at this table, and it's a bit awkward because I go get a couple of beers, and Jackie's just standing there, and I'm uncertain, a little bit shy about what to do. This is a little weird. I'm at a double date with my parents. Really? I'm really weirded out by this. And she looks at me, and she just looks at my dad. None of us kids ever called my dad by his first name. It was Dad, Sir, or the Admiral. Behind his back, we called him the Admiral, but Dad or Sir to him.
Yeah.
Jackie grabs my dad's hand and says, well, Chuck, if he's not going to dance with me, then you are. And my dad is not that, let's go dance kind of guy.
Yeah.
But she grabs him, and I'm standing there with my mom. I don't know what my facial expression was, but it must
probably
have been.
Probably the cartoon, like.
The cartoon mouth agape, like, what just happened? And she takes his hand and puts it on his shoulder, and she's got him, and she's trying to, I can't hear him because of the music, but I'm watching him, and she's showing him how to two-step. And that was the second check.
Yeah.
That's my girl. So handled my dad. Well, end that story with.
Did your dad fall in love with her?
I've only seen my dad cry twice in my life. One was we were little kiddos and he had to go on this extended trip away from mom, away from the house. He was in international oil. He was in the oil business. So he had to go overseas on this long trip. And I remember watching him say goodbye to go to the airport. And he's hugging my mom and goodbye to the kids. But it's the only time I saw my dad be tearful. And I'm little. I don't really understand what's going on. But it's the only time I remember seeing my dad be tearful because he's leaving to go on this trip. The second time was my wife's funeral. It's the only time I saw my dad cry. And he wrote these in letters like, we loved her. She was our daughter. Da, da, da. So, yeah, he definitely fell in love with her.
I mean, how could you not? I fall in love with her and I only heard
right?
2 stories.
And I love her parents because her mom and dad, Jim and Marie, of course, now they're well into their 80s.
Did they come to your ordination?
Yep, they sure did. Yeah. And they, just segue on that, is when a priest is ordained, if his mother's alive, which is usually the case of a younger man, your hands are chrismated by the bishop. He pours the sacred chrism over your hands as part of the ordination rite. And then it's tradition that the son, this newly ordained priest, takes that purificator and wipes his hands and presents it to his mother, who's usually in the front pew. It's typically the case. So at my ordination on June 6, 2019, the bishop chrismates my hands, and then I'm presented with 2 purificators. Oh. And I gave one to my mom and one to Marie, because they were side by side. It's like, here you go, moms. It was beautiful. And then the tradition is when your mother dies, you bury her with that purificator. So my mom recently went to glory on October 21st, and that's her case. And then my mother-in-law, Marie, she's got some health challenges. At some point, she's going to go to glory. So how blessed am I? I have 2 moms, a mother and a mother-in-law, both of whom I love in different ways, but both of whom I love. And both of them were very present in my marriage, and both of them were very present in my ordination, and both of them are buried with this traditional symbolism of that. Great. It's amazing.
So beautiful.
Yeah, it's amazing that I got to have that experience.
Well, I think part of having her mom as your mom now is that you get to hold on to a little piece of her because that she was formed by her parents, and so there's this thing of holding on to.
I live this, I'll say this, a bit of a segue, but maybe helpful to your listeners, right? How did I know she was the one? I'm 29, so I'd had some dating experiences. I guess one was longer term and others not so much. And I say this now to young people who are discerning marriage. And I can't give you the answer because I don't know that there is one. I can certainly identify things I would avoid, but there's not the perfect person, because realistically, do I believe God's will plays out in the spouse you ultimately choose, should one be inclined towards marriage, that God very much has a lot to do with that? Absolutely. Statistically, is it possible that there are multiple people that you could potentially be married to? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are. I would also say, in that same balance, there are also multiple people you should never be married to either, right? Mm-hmm. Both are true. So how do you know? Well, the evil one can replicate most things in life except peace. The evil one can never replicate peace. You can replicate joy or its perception of it. He can replicate confidence, material support, security, all those things. What he can't replicate is peace. And what I've observed and what I saw with Jackie was the manifestation of something I was told when I was a 19-year-old college student. We had this old professor who's long gone to glory. And this professor at Marquette is teaching a sophomore class in business. So the class was the class was a business class, not life application. It was really had to do with business management. And his name was Dr. Howard Healy. Been at Marquette for 30 years, Dr. Howard Healy. So we're all 19. He's He's probably 58, but he seemed like the Ancient of Days, you know. And I remember Dr. Healy, one day kicking it was co-ed, he kicks all the females out, and it's just the men. That's on a Tuesday class meeting. And on Thursday, all the guys were gone, and it was just the women. And he was teaching us about life. And here's what he said. He said to the young men, here's what he said. He said, because we're all 19, 20, what have you, he said, it's realistic that in the next 10 years, most of you are going to be married, right? That's just probabilistically true. That in the next 10 years, you 19, 20-year-olds, the most of you are going to be married. And this is like 1983 when he's saying this. And he said, because you're going to be in your 20s when you marry, the probability of your to-be spouse's parents being alive is very high. So here's a professor at a Catholic university talking to a bunch of mostly Catholic men. And he said, my discernment to you as an older man to younger men is be very discerning. My advice to you is to be very discerning. And he said, get to know your girlfriend's relationship with her parents very well. Get to know that because probably they're alive. So be very intentional about getting to understand your girlfriend's relationship with her parents. And here's what he said. And then I experienced it later in life in my 20s. He said, be very careful in developing too fast in a relationship with a girl whose father is the first one to break her heart. That's what he said. Be very careful in that. Doesn't mean don't marry her. Just be careful. Be careful with that. And then the same way he told the women in the class on the Thursday when the guys weren't there, because we asked our classmates, what did he tell you? Here's what he said to the women. He said, observe your boyfriend with his mom.
Yeah, I've heard that before,
right?
Actually. Yeah.
If he's disrespectful to her, if he's indifferent to his mother, that's you. It's not some weird Freudian thing where he's transferring his mom onto his girlfriend. Not like that. It's just that if he's learned that it's okay to be disrespectful to her, and now he's a 19, 20-year-old man where he should be mature enough, but he's indifferent and disrespectful to his mom, getting him to unlearn that in your marriage is going to be really hard. So be careful. For the guys, be careful if your girlfriend's heart's been broken by her dad. It's the first principal man in her life, and she's learned to be wounded. And she is wounded because he could have been a bonehead. Who knows what he did? And breaking her heart takes different forms. So fast forward in my own life, I graduate Marquette. Because of where I'm deployed in the Marines, I'm not in relationships. They're hard because we're sent to kind of remote places. 1988, I did not hear a woman's voice for 12 months where we were. I did not hear a woman's voice for 12 months. There weren't any. We were way up above the Arctic Circle. It was a long time out of the U.S. But I did have dating relationships, and two of the girls I dated, unknown to me until I get to date them, were of that experience that Dr. Healy was speaking of. They both had their hearts broken by their dad in different ways. And it manifests in the relationship, that the vulnerability they had to my own boneheadedness, something that would be benign or seemingly trivial from my perspective for them, could be pretty wounding and hurtful. And then I'd have to unravel that and try to,
very
respond.
Emotionally exhausting.
Yeah. And God bless them. When I meet Jackie and I met her parents, because we had the date I was just describing earlier with my parents, was our first date, chaperoned, embarrassing, but true. And then that's September, then I go to meet her parents for Thanksgiving in November of that same semester. And we drive up to Dallas, and she's told them about me because at this point we're dating a couple of months.
Yeah.
And we arrive at Dallas at their home, and what I observed, I wasn't thinking about it until now in our year of discerning marriage, but what I observed that first Thanksgiving meal with her parents was how loved she was by her dad.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful. She could joke with him, but what I saw, at that point she's 20. How old would she have been? She would have been 24. Yeah, she would have been 24. I'm watching this 24-year-old woman who's very competent, very smart. I mean, way beyond my intelligence level. But she had this confidence with her dad where she could joke with him about him doing dad stuff, like, oh, Dad. But she's this mature, competent young woman. But you could almost see this, you could almost picture her as a little girl being held in her dad's arms.
Yeah.
And he was so beautiful to her as a father, as was her mom. Her mom was so motherly to me, even though I'm meeting her for the first time. She's like, huh? But just to watch Jackie interact with her dad was convincing of what Dr. Healy had said years earlier, because this is 1992, and he had said that back in 83, like 9-10 years earlier. But I saw it manifest that be careful if her dad's the first one to break her heart. Doesn't mean don't marry her, it just means move slow. Make sure that's resolved. And in Jackie's case, it was the opposite. Here's a girl who loves her dad in the most complete way, recognizes he's imperfect. Like he would wear his nice shoes to go mow the lawn. And she'd say, Dad, really? That's what you're going to do? Or just stuff like that. She'd joke with him, but love him. And they had the most beautiful relationship, which I then benefited from as her husband. A year later, 2 years later, was I could be the biggest bonehead. And I was. At just being forgetful or dumb or working too long at work or traveling too much, whatever, stuff. And she was not wounded by that. She was so capable because she didn't have this vulnerability to my boneheadedness. What a grace.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I encourage young ones, because right now I'm privileged at St. Mark's. We have 6 couples in formation, and they all have their own beautiful stories. But I talk about that with them. It's not a no, never. It's a go slow here.
Yeah.
Because that woundedness needs to be resolved. Or that young man who's indifferent to his mom, you better probe into that. What's going on? Because if that's not solved, that's coming into your marriage. And that's going to be hard to... I said this at a women's conference earlier this fall. I was out at Holy Apostles. I said, don't marry a fixer-upper. Don't marry a fixer-upper. That guy who leaves the peanut butter knife on the counter, he's fine. That guy that walks into the house with the shoes, he's fine. That you can fix. You can't fix the guy that's indifferent to your feelings. That's going to be harder. That's a fixer-upper. Or who has really odd behaviors that are very dangerous or foolish, right? Be careful with that guy. That's a fixer-upper. You don't want the DIY project, because don't take on the mission of I'm going to convert my spouse. Don't. You won't. That's up to the Holy Spirit. I'll fix them with my faith. No, you won't. You can pray for them, of course. Prayer's efficacious. But don't enter into a relationship where you think it's your mission to convert and save them. The whole purpose of marriage is to advance each other in the faith. If you're having to clock in every day with this job and I need to convert my spouse, that's going to be tough.
I remember my mom, she talks about this all the time, where when they had, I don't know if I was born yet or not, but my brothers are 8 and 7 years older than me. So they're like quite a bit older. But I remember she always tells me this point where she said, yeah, I was so worried about your dad and we were just having such hard time in our marriage. And then one day I was sitting in prayer, because she would always do like 30 minutes of prayer in the morning before all the kids got up. And she said, I was sitting in prayer and God said, Mary, don't worry about him. I have him.
Yes.
Don't worry about him.
Said.
He's not
well
yours.
Said.
He's not yours. Like, he's yours, but he's not yours
not to like, you.
Yeah, it's not up to you. And
live your faith, be that person, but.
And she said up to that point, their marriage was so rocky and so hard. And then after she gave it over to the Lord and after she had that encounter, she said our marriage was completely different. And I mean, the other thing she said was obviously they went through Dave Ramsey, and that was also another big point in their marriage where it felt like their marriage was completely different. And
when you get your financial house in order, as he says.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
right.
important.
But
take that stress off.
Those 2 points are the part that she's shared with, I think, all of us multiple times.
As a priest in preparing couples for marriage, when one applies for marriage in our diocese, and it's true generically across the U.S. and perhaps throughout the world, you have to make application, right? There's this paperwork you have to fill out as you apply to be married witnessed by the Catholic faith in this diocese. And the forms have different names: Form A, Form B, Form C. So Form A is your biographical data. Who are you? What sacraments have you received? Have you been married before? Form B is dispensations, either for one of the spouses who may not be Catholic, or for the location of where the sacraments will happen. Okay. And then Form C is called testimony of freedom. Are you free to marry?
Yeah.
Okay. Form A, B, and C. Well, Form B is the one I find interesting to talk about with couples. And I've been privileged to witness the marriages now of like 27 couples.
Wow.
In 5 years.
That's cool.
But it's only been awkward twice, and I'm glad it's awkward. And I'm glad the diocese has this form. Here's what I mean. So Form B is, in order for a couple to have their marriage vows witnessed by a Catholic priest, one of them has to be fully professed as a Catholic in the church, desiring for it to be witnessed by the Catholic Church. Okay. There's no scenario where a Catholic priest would witness the vows of someone where one of the spouses is not fully professed Catholic asking for it. There's no scenario where, hey, can you come over to the lake and bless our relationship on the beach here?
Yeah.
Well, are you Catholic? No. Well, no. I'll pray for you, but I'm not. There's nothing happening that involves a Catholic priest unless one of you is fully professed asking for it. So Form B is this request for dispensation where it could be that one of the spouses is not fully professed or received into the Catholic faith, because you don't have to be. Only one of the couple has to be fully received into the Catholic faith asking for this witness. The other doesn't have to be. So in this petition for this dispensation, the spouse who is Catholic and the spouse who's not Catholic, in this case, both sign it.
Mm-hmm.
So this question has come up twice in these 27 marriages. The non-Catholic, is what that Form B says is, I, the non-Catholic, will fully support my Catholic spouse in the living out of their faith. It's what it says.
And the
raising of children. Yes.
Yeah.
Means I'm all in. I'm not Catholic, but my spouse is, so I am all in on their life in the Catholic faith. I don't ever have to become Catholic, but I am not going to be an impediment to their life in the faith. In fact, I'm going to promote it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've been asked twice, one by a would-be husband and one by a would-be wife, where is Form B for my faith expression? Where does my Catholic spouse sign up to support me in my faith?
They don't.
And I say, there isn't one.
Yeah.
Why not? So, there isn't one. This is a sacrament. You're asking the Catholic Church to witness it. I need to be careful in the language. It's not that we're indifferent to that other person's faith. That can sound rude. It's not meant that way. The truth is, we're only interested in your life of faith lived out through the Catholic Church. So whatever faith expression you had, as long as it's not some cultish, strange thing, but if you're a Christian, non-Catholic, we're inviting you into that experience of your Catholic spouse who will live out the Catholic faith, and you're committing by signature to sign up and do that. That's what that means. So there won't be any of this, why do you guys always have to go to Mass? I don't feel like going to Mass. No, non-Catholic spouse. First of all, your Catholic spouse better be the one encouraging Mass, and you as the non-Catholic spouse are saying, hey, honey, we should go to Mass this weekend.
Yeah.
There's no resistance there because you're committing to support their life in the Catholic faith.
Or if your spouse is sick and you have children, it's your job to get
You're
the
taking
kids
them,
to
but
Mass.
I'm not Catholic.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Doesn't matter. Yeah. I think the one thing that we are stressing so much with our children, they're 2, like our oldest is 2.5. And so we haven't gone there yet, but I've helped with, like religious ed. And when we were talking about the sacraments, one of them was marriage. And I hounded this point because I know, so Aaron has 4 siblings and they were all baptized, confirmed in the faith, but I don't believe any of them are practicing.
Sure.
And so
they're
all getting married, and except for one, they're all getting married or have been married. And so that's been really interesting for Aaron and I. And this is kind of the deep dive on where we went into like the canon law on marriage and the catechism on marriage, because we have this situation where now we have kids and we've had all these conversations with all these people about what we should do. Right. And then my brother, also one of my brothers, he married a non-Catholic. And it's interesting to see these problems when you're not formally catechized as a child. Like if you don't know that if you get married outside of the Catholic faith, that this puts you in a position where, you know, you can't receive the Eucharist or all of this other things.
It's a big deal. It's actually, the language is, not to speak over you, Natalie, use some strong language. Like that's, if you're Catholic, fully professed into the faith, and you enter into the civil rite of marriage, so civilly, legally, you're married. From a Catholic Church's perspective, that's called invalid. That doesn't mean not legal. No, you're legally married according to the state, whoever gave you that marriage license. But from the Catholic Church's perspective, that marriage is invalid. People are like, whoa, what does that mean? We're invalid. It means you're invalidly married.
Yeah.
You cannot receive the Eucharist. You still come to Mass, but you can't receive the Eucharist
until
that gets resolved.
Yeah, and one of the things I'll say is, like, I don't necessarily think that it's necessarily our parents' fault, because you can't give what you don't have, right? So if they didn't know...
Well,
right?
We, the church, meaning me, a priest, we need to do a better job of teaching. Sure.
And I think that, like, if you listen to Bishop Barron, he talks about there was many years of beige Catholicism, right, where they weren't really teaching what the church teaches. They were teaching that, you know, Jesus loves you and all this stuff.
He speaks on that extensively, the post-Vatican II world. And I'm neither a student of, I mean, I've studied classes on it in seminary, but I don't present myself to be some student of Vatican II and all changes in the liturgy, all that. That's a whole nother podcast show, I'm sure, but you should get a different guest because I'm not your expert. I'm not your expert. I will say this, is that growing up in the 70s and 80s and 90s Catholic Church in the United States, this is what surprised me as a priest. And it's on point to this.
Yeah.
Is I'm newly ordained in 2019. Your last year of seminary, you're being formed very intentionally in the rubrics of what the church teaches relative to the sacraments, especially the sacrifice of the Mass. Okay, so we have this beautiful book called the Roman Missal. Here it is. And the phrase many of us know as Catholics, do the red, say the black. Okay,
yeah.
So in the Roman Missal, which we use for the Novus Ordo Mass, which is the Mass we celebrate mostly in the Diocese of Boise, not the extraordinary form. But both forms of Mass, extraordinary form and the Novus Ordo, the Missal is both red and black text. And the red text is what to do, and the black text is what to say. So context matters. I'm coming out of a lived experience as an adult, first in the Marines, which is very rules-based and disciplined. Do it this way. Then I lived in the world of industrial science, which was very much for safety reasons based on do it. Here's what the book says. Do it this way. There's no creativity in the labs. There's no creativity. Some of our machines were processing 300,000 volts of energy. Do it right, because you can do some damage if you don't do it right. I get ordained, and I meet some of my peer priests, dear, authentic Catholic priests, God bless them. But they were ordained and lived as a ministering priest in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They've got the same missal I do. This happened not long ago. This happened recently, where the text in red says, do this. And that priest formation was, back to the beige Catholicism Bishop Barron speaks of, was he thought that was a variable. Like his lived experience and his formation was that was optional.
Yeah.
I'm coming from a formation environment, both pre-seminary and in seminary. It was, nope, the book says do it this way. You do it and say it this way. There's not a lot of latitude there. There's not a lot of latitude. You have latitude around the prefaces you're going to use or which form of the Eucharistic prayer. But the execution of the Mass has some very clear disciplines to it. Yet in that beige world, I've met priests lovely priests, well-intentioned, godly men, but their formation was different from mine. And it actually causes a moment of tension between your newer priests and some of your older priests.
Even with younger Catholics. Like I've seen a movement in younger like Catholics. I'm talking about like 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. And if you do the Mass, if something's wrong in the Mass, they're going to know it and be like, what's going on
you can
here?
be, and Bishop Peter, our Good Shepherd, speaks to that. You can be overly focused and zealous on the externalities, right? This was the issue with the Pharisees. They became more focused on the appearance and the externalities than the authentic experience of the faith. Okay, so there's that error where one can become so tradition-bound that they're more caught up in the externality of the tradition. That, for example, I'll use one example. I think it's beautiful if a woman adorns herself with a mantilla or a veil at Mass. My mom would do that. Okay. Are her prayers effective if she doesn't? Yeah. No. Mantilla, no mantilla. God bless you, right?
Yeah.
In our diocese, the teaching here is that one can receive, because it's what the book says, paragraph 161 of the Germ, the General Instruction of the Roman Missal for the Novus Ordo Mass. I can't tell you how many people have come to me and say, Father, why do you allow people to receive the Blessed Sacrament in their hands? I said, because the Church says so in the Novus Ordo Mass. In the extraordinary form, you wouldn't do that. In the Novus Ordo, you do. But most haven't read the Germ, haven't read the instructions to the Mass. Yeah. Or kneeling. Well, you must receive kneeling. Well, it's beautiful to receive kneeling, but the Church also says in the Novus Ordo form, you can receive standing up. Just be reverent. In all ways, be reverent. So what happens is you can find people who are very focused on the execution of the Mass relative to their preference, but their preference may not be what the Church actually says.
Yeah. I think for myself, I've said this on other podcasts, this might be redundant, but basically I've heard that, or what I said was that there was a period of time when you learn your faith, I think, or learn the reasons that things were done, you're like, oh, this is super beautiful. And then I fell into like judging, like, oh, well, they don't know. Like, they should kneel because, like, obviously this is Jesus and it's, like, and they don't, and so I felt like I fell into that for a while, and I've then come out on the other side of, like, I can't judge anyone's heart. So, like, how should I know? And, like, why can I judge that? But at the same time, like, I think it is beautiful when it's explained to you, like, the different things and why they're reverent and what they, like, symbolize.
What's the reason?
And,
Maybe offer this insight because, for our younger families, up in Coeur d'Alene, we had a lot of young families that were drawn into the more traditional expressions of the Mass. Or we see that trend across the United States, this upwelling in Catholicism where there's this growth in the more traditional, the parish expression of the Mass, just following the rubrics of the Church. Those tend to be fairly well-attended Masses. There's an understanding of the faith and the sacrament and the sacrifice of the Mass, teaching, right? So that's true. Not unique to me. I'm reflecting the words of others. It's not unique to me. I'm reflecting the words of others who said that. Why is that? It's because if you look at whatever you would define a millennial to be, I'm not sure the age bracketing, but let's say, is that 17 to like 35? Is that a millennial?
I think
and Z is below that.
I think it's 98 and young or and older. So if you were born, I think the cutoff is 98 or 97.
Birth year is 97. So if you're born after that or before that,
if you were born before 97, you're a millennial.
Okay.
And they actually have a new category, which is 93 to 2002, which they call like a mix between Gen Z and millennial because of like how technology fell and like how you grew up.
And then Z is after 02.
I think Z is technically 98 and younger
and beyond. But there's bridge over gap or overlap.
I think I've heard, I forget what they call them, but I think there's the gap there because of how much technology changed in that transitional period where
and it did a lot, didn't it? Like in those 10 years. Wow.
Well, if you're born in the 90s, really you have experience of growing up without any like any cell phones or anything, and then you also have cell phones, or like you're in the era of MSN where you get at home. I talk about this. You get home and you get on the chat feature and you're MSNing your friends from your computer, right? But this is all very new technology, so it's like. It's this gap of like, oh, there's a transition. Like, there's not just like a hard line. Like, obviously, there's like technology that has changed.
So let me offer this because I could potentially be interpreted or heard as being critical of the rigor and formation and discipline. I love it. Coming out of the Marines, coming out of my own personal preferences, coming out of my family of origin, the way we were raised as kids, we were a very traditional family. And as I said, my mother, in her 90s wearing her mantilla, beautiful. I have it. I have her mantilla from her passing. Yeah, it's beautiful. And maybe I'll get buried with that. Who knows? We'll do a trade. She has the purificator. I have her mantilla. But maybe so. But what I would say is when I interact with young, whatever that millennial grouping is, people in their late 20s or 30s now raising kids, and I ask them, like, why are you drawn to this truth, beauty, and goodness of the faith, this living out of what is it about the more traditional expressions of the Mass that draw you? And you know what the answer commonly is, not always, but commonly is, well, it's the rigor. It's the vetted. It's the notion that this isn't some trendy, just thought of it, creative Disney World experience. This has been vetted over the centuries. And it's a truth that we're hanging on to, because so many other things in their life institutionally, the business world, political world, the world of medicine, the church itself at times, academia, things that these ancient institutions that have been around a long time have failed them in different ways. So if they're in that bracketed age grouping of their mid-20s to mid-30s or so, their life experience is, I need truth. I need to know what's true. Because if I get on any digital media, as we lived through COVID, as we live through now with gender ideology, you can put any number of people in white lab coats with a lot of credentials under their name in the cryon that runs across the bottom of the screen. Dr. So-and-so, who looks like they really know what they're talking about. And that person can say the craziest things. And I'm trying to believe, well, hold on. What you just said, doctor, is crazy talk. And yet you're presenting yourself as an authority. So what's true?
Yeah.
And I think what these young ones are expressing relative to their attraction to the more traditional experiences in Mass in particular is, well, this is either true or untrue. And if that's the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, then I'm sure as heck going to act like it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to bend my knee before him, and I'm going to receive him reverently on my tongue. And my soiled hands aren't worthy of, it's that mindset.
I also think part of it is the depth of the tradition. So like think about, this is how I, we can talk about architecture, right? So like traditionally churches were built in a cross.
It was a purpose to them.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But the symbolism, it's like super deep, right? Like the more you learn about it, the deeper it is. Or like having the choir up above because of the acoustics of the building. Like there's so much
And it's not
thought.
entertainment. It's why they're hidden away.
Right. Yes. But there's like all this thought and this depth into it. Like, so when you think about like the architecture, if you have a cross, then you have where the Eucharist is where the heart, where the sacrifice takes place is at like the heart of Jesus.
Yeah.
And then the Eucharist presides at the head of Jesus.
It's very purposeful.
And there's this symbol to it. But then also like when you had the altar rail, right, this is like one of the most beautiful explanations I've listened to, or this really affected me, I guess I should say, is like when you have the altar rail, there's this reality that there is the spiritual world past the altar, and then there's us in the physical like world, right? And then what happens is during the Mass, the two worlds collide, and all of the prayers are funneled to this point. And this is again, if you're, what is it, ad orientem, when you're facing backwards?
Yeah.
Yes. I think, anyways,
to the east.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Your back is to the congregation. Uh-huh.
Right. So when they lift up, like there's this beautiful point that if you're explained to it, you're like, wow, that's really intentional. That's really deep.
It's beautiful.
It's really beautiful.
All that symbolism refocuses the mind. It does.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's the point of the depth of the thing that makes it important. But I guess I'll finish my thought with when he raises up the host, right, during the consecration, right, all of our prayers are funneled to the singular point where heaven meets earth, right? And you have the consecration of the Eucharist, right? And I think that visualization and that understanding and being able to put like an image or like a picture or something that you can visualize with your brain.
It.
Yeah,
so well
I think
said,
that's
Natalie.
important.
At St. Mark's, I'm privileged to serve there. We have a big school, about 370 kids at St. Mark's. And what we've been doing, Donna Gordon's the principal. She and the faculty, brilliant. Angela Paz is their director of spirituality she's on faculty, she's a teacher there, but she's also the director of spirituality. So we meet, and what we've been doing this semester is, we'll continue on into the spring semester, is we have teaching masses. So we take they're pre-K through 8. We take 2 classes at a time for age appropriate. For the littles, it's not necessarily useful, but for, let's say, what's the youngest grade we've had in there? I think second graders, they're 8. So for 2 through 8th grade, we take 2 classes at a time, and the student body is over at St. Mark's, the main sanctuary, and then Father Paul or I are over in the small chapel with the 2 classes, and we offer what's called a teaching mass. A teaching mass. And so in lieu of a homily, we teach what we're doing at Mass. We explain it, where the prayers came from, why we do what we do, why we use these different linens, what are their names. We deconstruct for them, if you will, the Eucharistic prayer. While we're saying it, we'll explain its components. We don't interrupt the consecration. We don't do that. But we explain the why we do what we do, to include architecture and symbolism and what once people know that,
or even your vestments,
like,
everything.
Wow, yeah, we vest in front of them. Like, why do we do what we? Once people are exposed to that, they're very much drawn into the Catholic expression because it's so rooted in history and tradition and beauty. What I would say this, because I'm 61, I was as a youth in the 70s. And here we were in Northwest Ohio, a relatively conservative part of the country, but nonetheless, at St. Michael's, the Archangel Catholic Church, I remember the happy, clappy era. I remember the introduction of the guitar mass, which drove my dad to apoplexy, but I remember the campfire songs and Jesus is my friend and the felt banners and the liturgical dance and all that stuff. And then I was an altar server, and I'm just observing that. And again, I'm not the expert on that. Others are. But the church went through an era in the spirit of ecumenism post-Vatican II. It would seem, again, not the expert, but it would seem, based on what other experts do say, in its intentionality and purpose of ecumenism, we diluted down or we minimized our Catholicism.
Yeah.
And we became this hybrid, semi-Protestant, keep it neutral, get rid of all the beautiful architecture. Let's just build a worship hall, get rid of the statuary, make the Stations of the Cross this tiny little tile on the wall, get rid of the three-dimensional, The church went through this era of, said with admitted naivety, I mean, there'll be others listening to this podcast can write in and correct, and they should if I'm wrong. It seems like we tried to stop being so Catholic, and we tried to fit in to society. And I say to St. Mark's, I said it at St. Charles and Salmon, I've said it at St. Thomas and Coeur d'Alene, and I'm just repeating the words of the greats. We don't stop being Catholic. No. Stop bringing the world into the church. You bring the church out into the world. The world needs you to be Catholic. You be proudly Catholic, appropriate pride. You be confidently Catholic in the truth, beauty, and goodness. You don't ever apologize for being Catholic. If that makes someone uncomfortable, that could be the doorway of invitation opening up for them.
Yeah. I think one of the things that this ties into is going back to saying, like, for example, my mom and dad, when we talked about, the marriage stuff, when we were growing up, it was like twofold. First, they thought, okay, well, if we send our kids to CCD, then they're going to learn what they need to learn. And I think that my mom, I don't know about my dad, but my mom felt like she was inadequate to teach that because she was Protestant before and then converted to the faith when she married my dad, or actually a few years after. But anyways, even then, it wasn't until I was in high school or even in college that she really was like, or maybe it was in high school, but she was like, I didn't really know, like I wasn't taught that Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist. Right. And how many years have I been a Catholic and never actually believed or knew that? Yeah. She's like, it wasn't, and it didn't really hit home even then until COVID, right? When she couldn't have the Eucharist. And then she's like, oh, wow, like I actually believe this, And I think it's that same period of time where...
I point back as a priest, I point back to us priests. If we priests and bishops don't act like that's the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, well, why do we blame the congregation for not having that confidence? If we Mr. Happy Clappy or return. There was a period. It's now changing,
Yeah.
but there was a era. I don't have the bounds of time here, but there was an era when we literally took the tabernacle in churches and they moved it off to the side and they put the celebrant's chair directly in line of sight behind the altar. Well, really?
Yeah.
We made the priest the primary focus?
Yeah.
No. Put that tabernacle back. Here at the cathedral, that was beautifully done by the bishop and Father Mariusz over the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years. Beautiful kind of return to the norm, return to the standard. And it's so beautiful in the cathedral that that's the case, because there was a time, an era where they had moved it off to the side, like it's in the way or something. I know that wasn't the intent, but that's certainly an experience.
Yeah.
And as we make the Mass more reverent, and we start as priests and bishops behaving like that's the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, that helps embolden people in that belief.
Yeah. I definitely, I'm not a priest and I'm not, not in that. But I also appreciate when priests speak very plainly. So like Father Paco as the parish priest at my parents' church. And he has, I think, really brought the attendance back because he's just blunt with people. And like one of the things that I love that he says is he's like, why I'm teaching this and why it's hard is because he's like, I'm honestly being a little selfish because I want to go to God and at my judgment and say,
we're accountable.
I don't want to hear God say, well, why didn't you teach that? Or why does that person not know you were his pastor or whatever? And he says, so this is why I'm telling you, like, you guys just need to buck up and listen to it. I
on
love
your
his
podcast,
bluntly.
Here, I'll get you some viewer response. Here you go, Natalie. If you want to measure your viewing audience, here's an opportunity. Without being ridiculous, here's an idea. Baptism. What a privilege. I at 5 years of priesthood at this point, I mentioned these 27 vows I've been privileged to witness. Well, I've baptized well over 100. Well over 100. What a privilege. And at St. Mark's, because it's a larger congregation, we have a lot of baptisms, and the deacons and Father Paul and I are privileged. But there are a number of people I meet who, having given birth to a kid in the last 15 years, there can be a scenario where that child is now 10, 11, 12 years old. The parents are at Mass bringing the kid, but the child is not baptized. And they're in this idea that, that's a personal decision. I need to leave that up to my kid. Well, here's a truth of baptism. This is one of those, what was his name, Father Paco? Father Paco type messages. And I even said that recently at St. Mark's. Baptism matters. Why? It matters this way. When we're baptized, in that grace-filled moment, Jesus Christ writes his name on our soul, so that when we die, we experience what's known as the particular judgment, right? At the moment of our natural death is the particular judgment. In that particular judgment, per Jesus Christ's presence, he is our advocate. Who's the judge? The Father. God the Father is the judge. Jesus Christ is our advocate. He's our defendant. And so he wrote his name on our soul. So that the scenario, a human image can be, a human accessible image can be a courtroom setting where there's this merciful judge, just and merciful judge, God, presiding. We're at the defense table, and there we are, and there's Jesus Christ, who wrote his name on our soul, saying, just as we have in the penitential rite, Jesus sits at the right hand of the Father to intercede for us.
Yeah.
What does that mean? That means at our particular judgment, Jesus Christ is right there, and he says in human language, Father, this is one of mine. I'll speak for them.
Yeah.
If you're not baptized, you're at the table alone. There is no one to speak for you. It's you and the judge. That's what it means.
Yeah. I think so. This is something that I really enjoyed. I listened to Catholic Answers a lot.
Sure.
Anyways, but one of the things that they said recently that I thought was really a really good point, you hear about these dedications and whatever in more Protestant spheres or whatever, or they're not doing baptisms for children because of that reason. one of the things that he said, and granted, I want to preface this, he made a lot of good points on why we should baptize, and he was going through, so the people knew the why, but one of the things that they still had was like, well, it doesn't feel like it should be my choice, it should be their choice. And then he said this, and I think this is perfect. Just as much as that child didn't choose to be born, is also like the choice of the parents should be that they shouldn't have the choice to not be Catholic, like not be baptized.
Well, you promised to raise them in the faith. It starts with baptism.
Yeah. And I thought that was a really good parallel, because I think sometimes people, like, I don't know why, for some reason it really just stuck out to me. Like, they didn't choose to be born. Right? They didn't choose to be born. And so now it's your responsibility as a parent to do as much as you can to get them to heaven. And so therefore, they don't really have a choice to be baptized, and they need to,
It's interesting because I have 5 siblings. You were asking about them, Natalie. I have 4 sisters and a brother, and they're just beautiful lives. All of my siblings, just God bless. What a gift I have received as their brother to have them as mentors or siblings. But it's interesting in marriage when awkward way of introducing the idea. My point is that when you marry, your singular purpose as a Catholic is your spouse's entree into heaven. Don't marry a person who's not going to advance that cause. That was my comment earlier on marrying a fixer-upper, thinking, oh, you're going to save them. Well, they need to be saving you too, in other words. There needs to be bilateral. The singular purpose of marriage is the advancement of your spouse into heaven, and then the fruitfulness of that marriage is the children. When you graced with children open to life, because that's a promise you made when you're younger and you have your vows witnessed by the Catholic Church. If you're younger, you're going to make that promise. If you're older, that's obviously age appropriate. You may be beyond, not that you're closed off to life, it's just that's not an expectation that a couple getting married in their 60s are going to have children, let's say. So when you have those kids, that then becomes your singular purpose. It's not only your spouse's advancement in the faith, but your zeal, your focus is those children's advancement in the faith. You don't leave it up to them to make proper decisions around nutrition. If little Johnny wants to eat sugar smacks, if that's even a cereal, or M&Ms every day for breakfast, what parent would say, yeah, go ahead. Your choice. Johnny, when you're old enough, you'll make the right decision. No. You guide them. You form them. Well, what about their salvation? Why would you leave it up to them? How about baptizing them? And then as they advance in the faith, they are able to approach the altar and receive the Blessed Sacrament, the real presence of Christ. Why would a parent ever leave that up to the child to decide if that's what they want?
Yeah. I mean, think about my scenario when I was saying about being confirmed. It wasn't until I was in my early 20s before, and this is after a lot of study. I mean, in high school, I was dating a guy that was very anti-Catholic. And so I basically read through before they had their, radio series that I was aware of it. I read through the Catholic Answers book, and I studied, underlined, studied, and was fighting for my faith. Right.
Yeah.
So, but again, it wasn't until I was in.
God potentially used that man, that boy.
Oh yeah.
To guide you in that sense of I know what something is by what it is not. Right. It's the via negativa.
But again, at the same time, it wasn't until it was years after that experience for me to really be like, wow, I wish I could, really rededicate my life to Christ in this way, like a confirmation or something.
Sure.
Because
we do leave that up to that point, Natalie. We do leave confirmation up to the decision, because we want the young one in this diocese. You have to be at least in the 9th grade. We want that young one to own their faith. Yes, your parents may have, and in my encouragement, and others more important than me, should have baptized your child when they are a child under age 8. You should do that. Why would you not do that? Then that child is usually formed and taught and incented to receive the Blessed Sacrament, make their first communion. They should do that. Even though we as a church say the age of reason is 8 years of age. Okay. Confirmation, we're inviting that teenager to make that choice. I choose this. It's a conscious choice, so that they're owning of their faith. It's not, I don't do this because mom and dad say so. I mean, that's good. Mom and dad should model that for us. But I want this for me. I want to grow in this faith. I want the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. I want that Pentecost moment. now in my life so that I can advance in the faith, because I'm about to enter into some pretty tumultuous years of high school and college, my 20s, where having that Holy Spirit, that advocate at my side in my life, really, truly so, it's going to be pretty helpful. Make better decisions because I have that Holy Spirit, that still small voice.
Yeah. When I was in college going through a lot of this, one of the things that another interesting, maybe off topic thing was I had a sister named Sister Marina who helped me. She was my spiritual advisor for a while.
Good for you for seeking that out.
Wow. Oh yeah. It was another God moment. Like God totally called me to her. It's all by happenstance. But, one of the things she always said that I always think is interesting is she's like, you can think about it this way, that we don't ever have our own thoughts. We have thoughts being fed to us from the Holy Spirit, and then we have thoughts being fed to us from like a demon, and you're just the dial. Like, which ones are you going to listen to?
Wow. Okay.
And
that's a nice visual.
It is a visual. And granted, you take it as it is, but I always thought that was really interesting. But again, it's like if you're baptized, then obviously you're going to be able to be more inclined to listen to the good thoughts or like listen to God's voice, because like you said, your soul has Jesus's name inscribed on it, and you're going to be able to listen to his voice. You're going to hear the shepherd's voice more than you would be able if you were not, right? But anyways, that's just an interesting thought and visual that she gave me when I was going through that discernment period.
Yeah, it is. That's a very helpful guidance. Is what influence are you going to react to? Are you shielded by the protection and presence of the Holy Spirit, or are you just at the whim of the created world where the evil one has domain? I mean, we reference that all the time. God asks the evil one in the book of Job, "Where have you been?" And he says, out and about on the world, out and about on the earth, impacting people's lives. Again, the evil one can replicate many things in life and in faith, but he can't replicate peace and truth. He can't. And his ultimate approach is deception. It's the question he asked Eve. Are you sure? Are you sure?
Yeah.
God said, don't eat of the tree. Are you sure human beings can't change their gender? Are you sure that's really a baby in the womb? Are you sure? That's the voice of the evil one.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so the last thing I'll ask, which is actually one of the questions that I wanted to ask you from the very beginning.
We've had a nice visit. Yeah.
Oh, I know. Yeah. I don't know. I don't necessarily know if this is the doorknob question, like you had said earlier, right. But it is one that I did want to ask you is, so I guess one of the reasons, and this is very evident to the podcast we've had so far, is that I think a lot of people, the reason that they have enjoyed your homilies and things is because you have this unique experience again of being married and then going into the priesthood. So in what ways did marriage prepare you for the priesthood? Like, how has that produced fruit in your parish?
How does that work? Well, two beautiful questions. So I'll begin and try to give you a succinct answer as best I can. God bless you for listening to me. At ordination, I was gifted an ordination chalice. Most priests are. And so this chalice that I use at St. Mark's that I've had since ordination in 2019, it's this basic, simple silver chalice. It's just machined. I mean, it's beautiful. It's precious metal on the inside. But on the bottom is this inscription. And what it says is, tell his story with H-I-S, capital H-I-S. Tell his story. And then it says, Jackie. That's what it says. So at Mass, the host, which is to be consecrated into the Blessed Sacrament, it sits on this metal disc called a paten. And the paten that came with that chalice, it's a set, is highly polished, really highly polished, mirror finish. So when I'm standing over the altar in the privilege of serving as a priest, I have the chalice above the paten, and I see the reflection in the paten of that inscription from my wife. Tell his story, Jackie. So she actually is speaking to me in every Mass. I mean, it's every Mass. Plus, our faith teaches us that in the sacrifice of the Mass, you have church triumphant, heaven, and church militant, us here on earth. We meet in the Eucharist. We meet at the altar. We are meeting right there. So there's this component of the Eucharistic prayer called the anamnesis, the remembering. And we remember the history of our faith, remember the Holy Father, remember our Good Shepherd, our Bishop Peter, our Bishop. And then we pause and we say, and remember those who've fallen asleep in the hope of the resurrection, right? That's the remembering. And you should, I think, as a celebrant, this is my preference, I think you should pause for a minute and let people remember those loved ones that they care about, that who've died and gone on in this hope of the resurrection. So I do. I think of her. I think of my mom and dad. I think of loved ones in my life. And then we continue on with the prayer. So how has it helped me? So what Jackie was to me, I was the wannabe Catholic. She was the real Catholic. That's how I knew her in our married life.
Was she Catholic?
Very much. Oh,
okay,
yeah.
When you met her, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
She was Catholic. Okay. Her raised in the Catholic faith by Jim and Marie, her parents. But she was more authentic. I was more of a on-display Catholic. She was the real deal. I mean, she really, not showy, not outward. It was all about interiority, and her prayers were like real prayers. And she would encourage me in prayer. Like I would be snarfing down a hamburger somewhere. She'd say, she had such a cute way of saying it. She'd say, a lot of Catholics pray before they eat. That's what she'd say. And I just think, oh man, slam, boom. Or it'd be something scary going on in our life. And even in her cancer, she'd say, it's at this moment that a lot of people rely on their faith. And I'd be out there, the doctor's this or test that or experimental medicine. Jackie was so real. She was just real. I was more of a fraud in that sense. So that propels me into priesthood because a few days before she died, she reminded me of my youth when I was an altar server, and I talked about the potentiality of being a priest. And I had told her about my days in high school visiting seminaries, and she knew that years earlier. She knew that like 14 years earlier. So that was a long story. So a few days before she died, she's home in our home in hospice, and we're having some quiet moments. And we know her earthly life is soon to end. I mean, it's prognosis of her illness. But she was sitting up, and it was on a Saturday, and I'm there with her. It's just her and I in this room, and I'm beside her, and she said to me, "This is what's in your heart. Go do this. Go tell his story. That's your life." How you do that? But she said, so follow your heart, and if you're called to be a priest, go do that. Be a good one. Go do that, but be that authentic priest who's not all high and mighty and full of himself. No, be humble and serve. God will use you. Just do that. It was her encouraging me. And in our married life together, there were a couple of experiences we had that were unrelated to a discussion on priesthood, where she, as my spouse, as my wife, kind of held me accountable to being a husband. We didn't have children. We wanted to, and it didn't work out. But in the role of husband or father, be that protective, provisional person. Be that person, protective and provisional. Not just physical protection, but protective of a heart. Protect her heart from woundedness or harm. So when she encouraged me to really give it a serious thought about priesthood, after she died, I did. It was fully in my mind, and it was an idea that just doesn't leave you alone. So I did continue to work for a couple of years, and my boss was good because he filled my life with all kinds of activities and stuff. So I didn't have a lot of woe is me time. I was like, oh, get back on it. Yeah. That was very intentional. But how is it the fruits? So the fruits are, I had this life with a woman who was authentic in her faith. It wasn't for show. It was real. And she formed me in that. I saw the authenticity of how she lived her faith, her courage in her illness. They told her when she was diagnosed 6 years before she died, that oncologist said, because of the type of cancer she had and where it was located, you will die from this. We're not solving this one, kid. She was 34 years old. We're not solving this one. That's not true, praise God, for most people. In her case, it was true. And she grabbed my hand when he told us that news, and she just quotes Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. It's okay. Okay, well, I'm a mess. I mean, I'm not the one diagnosed. She is. Yet she said, be still and know that I am God. It's okay. Wow. And then she lived that for the next 6 years in the most beautiful way. So that's a fruit that bears out all the time because she formed me as her husband. She formed me in her holding me accountable. She's like, if follow the Spartan way of being, which I find affinity with. The great story of the Battle of Thermopylae, where the queen says to King Leonidas, "You come back with your shield or on it." She says to her husband, "You come back with your shield or on it," meaning you die in defense of us, Sparta. You die. Come back with your shield or be carried, meaning defend us or come back in the attempt of defending us. Come back with your shield or on it. And I think I've said this to young women or older women, either way. There's no sweeter words to a man from a man's perspective. This is, of course, an opinion, but I think it's many men hearing your podcast will say, yeah, that's true, is when a woman holds her man accountable, whether it's a wife to a husband or a mother to a son. I don't know a woman's view on this. I just tell you a man's view. When a wife holds her husband accountable or a mother holds her son accountable, like, son, you're performing at this level, you're capable of this using hand symbols, you're capable of operating at a high level, you're operating at a low level, you're my son, I know you better, do better. Or when a wife says that in a loving way to her husband, not a critical, snarky way, but a loving way. Husband of mine, I need you to protect my heart. Really? What's that look like? Well, it looks like not doing these other, things. You're killing me. You're breaking my heart. Stop it. Well, why? Because I know you can. You're a capable love. That's why I married you. Start operating at the level of the man I married. Stop being this knucklehead. For a man, that is music. That is the most loving thing a woman can say to a man from a man's perspective. I don't know how it feels to a woman, but to a man, you hold your man accountable, he's on. He's like, wow, you think I'm capable of that? I said, I do. That's why I married you. Oh, I guess I'll step in. I guess I'll respond. So Jackie did that, and the fruits of it now are obviously through prayer. Whenever I engage in something, even us sitting down today for your podcast, I'll ask for her, because she's alive. She's alive. She's a composite being right now, mind and soul, and one day again glorified body. But I pray for her guidance, for her challenge, for her holding me accountable now as a priest. The fruits of it are not. It's not that if I wasn't married, I couldn't enter into those conversations. No, I've known many wonderful priests, the most of whom, extreme majority, have never been married. What does it give me? Well, it gives me insights into things I would have done differently if I could do it over, right?
Yeah.
Mistakes I made, things I did or didn't do, said or didn't say. Boy, I'm aware of those, and I bring those into marriage prep or marriage counseling, for sure. My lived experience of mistakes or failure, oh yeah, made more evident now as a priest. I can speak to them because I own them. I did them.
Yeah.
Or what I would say to a young man listening to this podcast, if there's tension in your mind between desiring to be married and have children and serve as a priest, I would say perfect, because it's the same charism.
Yes.
If I meet a man who says, I'm interested in seminary, Father, and I have no desire to ever be married, I can't imagine having children. Obviously, Father Nathan and the bishop would have the authority to discern that beyond me. I don't. But I'm not sure I would even arrange the meeting. Because if a man says, I have no interest in ever being married, I have no interest in having children, I would say, well, it intrigues me that you think priesthood would be a good fit. Because that's totally what priesthood is being provisional, being progenitive and giving life, in supporting life and living that life, that mutual accountability. That's the whole life of priesthood. You are a father and a husband in the proper description as a priest, in that you are giving birth to life in the Spirit through the sacraments.
Yeah, and I've heard someone also say that it's like you're not just skipping children. You get spiritual children of all different ages and sizes and whatever. And
Natalie,
so it's like...
it's so well said. I was privileged to serve in different parish communities, 3 of them now. St. Mark's is my 3rd. And I have of those 100 plus baptisms, a good 60 of them are kids. And it fills my heart to get cards from these kiddos. Or just a few weeks ago, I was visiting with some of them where I've actually baptized their siblings. So now there's some families where I've baptized 2 or 3 of those. Or I've baptized the parent who now has a child, and I baptized them too. In my own family, I'm baptizing my niece's children.
That's amazing.
What?
That's
Yep.
so amazing.
And I get to witness her marriage. I mean, it's the fruits of this marriage are both in a familiar sense true, but also in people who are not genetically related, but sacramentally related. And I just think, man, those are, in quotes, my kids. I mean, I'm not changing diapers and having them puke all over me. That's not happening, generally. But there's this love relationship where I love them as their, in quotes, father, where I'm provisional and protective, but I'm most interested in their spiritual well-being. And it's real. It's like, wow. I definitely am more engaged in some of these kiddos' lives than their uncle.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
Not always, but sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's like 2 points that I want to
Go
make
ahead.
before we move on. So one of the things that I wrote, actually, you were talking, and okay, let me give some background.
God bless your patience with me, too.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. It's so great. This conversation is wonderful. But one of the things I've been really interested in recently is actually saints and like how they become saints and the process of which you become a saint, and how I think I just heard that there's 2 Americans that are being
soon to be.
they're going to start the process to go through.
Because the Holy Father just announced, I think a week ago, he's going to have Giorgio Frassati and
Right. No, I'm talking about Americans from America that are going. They just got through
started the process.
Yeah, like the Conference of Bishops have now proposed them, so they're going to the Vatican to start this process, right? Yeah. So I'm like super interested in this and how it happens and like the legal like aspect of it, which is probably not the best. But one of the things they do is they have like a guild, right? Which then is like the ones taking how do I say that? Like it's like a group of people that their focus is to get the message of that person out.
Yeah, they promote the cause. They do.
Right. So as you're talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, your wife has to be a saint.
Well, I don't know. If you ask her, she'd say no. I mean, you ask me, was she she wasn't perfect. She was perfect for me.
Yeah.
Right.
But as you're talking, I'm like, man, she would be a great person to ask for like intercessory prayer, which is what the guild does, right? That's the whole purpose of like.
I mean, that is first of all of us as Catholics, our goal in life is to become a saint. So we're all in that. That's our intentionality for all of us. Be a saint. Well, what's a saint? You tell the kiddos, we form them in CGS or the elementary school kids. What's a saint? A saint is a sinner who never quit trying. That's a saint. A saint is a sinner who never quit trying. And then formally, you're talking about the dicastery that oversees that. So a person dies. What's common trait of all saints? They're dead. So they start with that. Right. So there's no living saint that's a saint yet. They may become a saint, but so they're dead. So they've passed away. They've died. And then there are people who know them or know of them or learn about them, and they pray intercessory for them, for that person to intercede in their life.
And it's really important because they have to have miracles attributed
at least
to them.
2. So then this changed substantially in the 16th century. Prior to that, the naming of saints was a little more broad and a little more less rigorous. Mm-hmm. In the 16th century, that was redone. And now that process of naming saints is much more rigorous, and today certainly is the case. Yeah. So yes, a person dies. Subsequent to their death, people are praying to that person for intercessory help. Today's, St. Catherine of Alexandria, right? Yeah. So you pray for intercessory help. And then something happens that's observed that the scientific or intellectual world can't explain. Like we don't know how to explain what just happened. We don't have an answer to that result. And that has to happen twice. And then that's very carefully examined and vetted. It's an exhaustive process. It's not quick.
It takes years.
Oh.
Or decades.
Or centuries. It takes a long time. But the stories are gathered and the testimonies are gathered and the vetting of the experience is looked at very exhaustively. And if the conclusion is made, yes, these are verifiable miracles. We have no other way to explain this other than that person's intercession because it was a very specific petition. It wasn't generic. Saints in heaven, pray for me. No, it's very specific. It usually has something to do with the charism of that person.
I think like an example would be like Saint Gianna. One of her miracles was, I think that was in Brazil, but her first one had to do with a pregnancy that was recommended that it was terminated.
Okay.
And they prayed for a miracle for their baby's health, and they were born fine. And I think a similar thing happened in Brazil where they prayed for, they had like this, or the mom was really sick or something. Can't remember, because she had, she died right after giving birth, because of complications. Like I think she had a cyst or something.
Oftentimes these miracles, you're right, Natalie, they're often medically themed. It's a medically themed miracle. In other words, the medical world, the scientific world cannot explain how this happens.
Right.
But it happens.
Yeah.
And I know of not to segue, I'll stay on point, but I know of I don't have permission to use their name on your podcast right now. I didn't think of advance to ask them. But I know personally of a person right here in the diocese. I know them personally, who I know them to be 100% authentic. There's no fraud, and they're not crazy. Oh, no. I know that person's had a medical miracle. And I know the science around how they would discern whether or not what this person claims is true or not is unambiguous. It's like, true or not. Like, it's so evident that this is true or not true. It's not ambiguous. That person's walking around right here in this diocese. Now, I don't know who their intercessory saint was. I don't know that depth. I know the person, and I know the medical miracle. And it's without doubt that medical miracle happened. Because it's like, it's not like, oh, I felt bad and I got better. Oh, no. It's like, I have this thing that's very measurable, and now I have it not at all. It's completely gone.
Yeah.
There's no evidence. Yeah. And her own doctors are saying, it's a woman, her own doctors are saying, I don't know. We have no way to explain that. That can't be true, and it's true.
I just listened. So I actually have been learning a lot about the saints over the last couple of years through the Saints Alive podcast, which is for little kids. Anyways, but it's similar to Saint or Venerable Patrick something. I'm so sorry, but he was the one that coined the phrase, a family that prays together stays together. Yeah. So anyways, and he was trying to get people to families to pray the rosary. And in his story, he got really ill or had some medical problem. And then finally he just started praying for Mary's intercession. And it was basically like, okay, I'm going to do this for you, but you need to make sure that people start praying the rosary. And that was his mission after he healed. Mission. But he was going through seminary when he got sick. And after this point of being in the hospital for so ever many months, he got completely healed. Like he basically was like, the doctors were saying like, well, why would we retest you? You're so ill, like you're going to die. And he's like, no,
give it a test.
Retest me today. Yeah. Like I'm healed. And then they tested him and he has no sign of whatever it was. It was some kind of lung thing, I think. Anyways. And then he became a priest and advocated for families to pray the rosary and whatever.
What a great message.
And he's a venerable testimony right now. So,
but that's so saints. And how many saints are there? You see different assumptions or lists because the naming of saints was a little less defined prior to the 16th century. There are saints today that were named saints that today the dicastery, the Vatican would say, no, that wouldn't be a saint, But since the 16th century, that process has been made more rigorous, and today in the 21st century, it's very rigorous. But they live.
Yeah,
that's not weird.
Yeah, yeah. And so like, tying this all into what I was saying earlier is like the one thing I've actually learned the most by talking to you is the first thing is you have loved your wife and you continue to love your wife. Oh, yeah. And like the beautiful thing, like when you're talking about, your chalice and I forget what the plate is.
The paten.
Paten. Yeah. And how she has that message on there really
it's holding me accountable in every mass, what she's doing. Beautiful.
Well, but in that it's like you're also becoming a priest was how you loved your wife even more because now you're even like praying in the mass.
Thank you, Natalie.
Her.
Why are you a priest? I don't know. Who knows? What I make is this promise because God bless people who listen to my homilies. Oh, gosh. They need to bring those stadium cushions sometimes, because Father, yeah. Because I am trying to teach. I'm very sincere about that, trying to teach, as are just about every priest I know. So she's dead in the sense of her natural life, but she's alive now. And whatever her beatific vision experience is, I can tell you it's beautiful. One time I was at a conference giving a talk, and I said, my proof of heaven is not found in a theology book. It's not in the catechism. Nope. It's not in meeting some great mystic. Nope. My proof of heaven is I held a woman who saw it, because I held her when she died, Jackie. I was 8 inches from her. The look on her face, the countenance, that's heaven. I mean, I'm holding a woman who's looking at heaven. And my younger sister, Chris, God love her, she's a medical doctor, and she was there in our house. So Jackie dies. I'm holding her. I lay her back on the pillow. I go upstairs because it was 2 a.m. I go get Chris. I say, Chris, my younger sister, Chris, come help me with Jackie. She comes downstairs. We go into the room. It's low light. It's dim light. I don't say a word. I didn't say to Chris, I think Jackie's dead. I didn't say that. I said, come help me with Jackie. She comes into the room. She's ahead of me because she's, she thinks it's urgent. She comes in ahead of me. She pauses. She looks at me and she says, look at her face. Look at her face. And I knew because I had just left her. And this beauty, this look on her face was so beautiful. Oh, my goodness, this radiance, this countenance. So that's my proof of heaven, is I held a woman who saw it. There you go. That's not in a book. Okay. Yeah. So I can't, in a physical way, I can't love her in a manifest physical way now. She's in a different dimension than me, live, but in a different dimension. What I can do is love the people of the church that the bishop gives me the privilege of serving, wherever that is. He can send me to the moon. I don't care. I promise to serve so I can love them. So I'm going to cry with you when you cry. I'm going to laugh with you when you cry or when you laugh. I'm going to baptize your kiddos. I'm going to bury your kiddos. I've had to do both. I'm going to love your grandparents. I'm going to bury your grandparents. If a guy comes and says, hey, my life is screwed up, I'm going to say, stop being a jerk. What are you doing? In the confessional, the same way, I did all these things, I'm a bad person. No, you're not a bad person. You're a person who made mistakes just like me, so stop doing it. There you go. What's your plan? It's this mutual accountability. I go to men's retreats, I speak differently to them than I do to the women.
Yeah.
Language shifts a little bit, the message shifts a little bit. It's the same message, which is know that you are loved, serve the Lord with your life. There you go. Takes different forms. So my whole point is I can't love her more because she's not here. But I'm going to try to love you. There you go. Love her by loving you. How about that? So the question you were asking is how do the fruits bear out? And I'll offer this experience, which is, I was formed in my childhood with some inspiring priests. I had them growing up through my adult life. We certainly had some inspiring priests at Marquette. That's a Jesuit institution. I had priests that were chaplains in the military that have impacted me. Then Jackie and I, in our married life, we belonged to several different parishes and had wonderful priests. The priest that married us, John Laboni, Father Laboni, down in Dallas. He's a tremendous priest. He was such a good mentor to us in the early years of our marriage. And then in formation in seminary, amazing priests. So there are lots of amazing priests I've had. And most of them entered priesthood early on, or formation early in life in their 20s, and then have served their entire life as a priest. Okay. So for my friend I mentioned as we started a couple hours ago, and I mentioned my friend Mike Rizzo down in the Diocese of Orange, who gets ordained at 61. I was ordained at 56. And he'd been married 27 years. What's common about Mike and I? Maybe it's this. It doesn't make us better priests. Nope, because I've had great priests. What makes us interesting or perhaps approachable for people is this assumption that because we've had this long life experience prior to priesthood, that we're more accessible on matters of common experience like marriage or business issues. Okay. What I would offer is this. None of the priests that mentored me, whether before I met Jackie or subsequent to marrying her, had been married, but they were great motivators and great spiritual guides. I take advantage of Father Dominic or Father Johannes out in Our Lady of Ephesus.
Oh, love them.
Those are amazing men.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will affirm that. Those are
Yeah.
amazing men. Those are models. Those are godly men, right?
Yeah.
Make no mistake. And I've mentioned many that have formed me, and the priests of this diocese, the vast majority of whom don't know marriage in the sense that I do or did, yet they're amazing priests, and I'm mentored by them. I'm mentored by them on a daily basis. Father Paul, never been married. What a great priest. What a great mentor. Our bishop, our shepherd.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Yeah, he could give a seminar on marriage. Never been married. So being married didn't make me unique, but it does create the assumption that I may be able to help. Okay, that's good, and I'm not going to say, I'm not going to deny that. No, that's great. What I think Mike and I, guys like Mike and I, Father Mike Rizzo and I bring is, for many young priests, new to the ministry, just because of the fact we don't have a lot of priests serving, they are early on thrust into leadership roles where they may not have had a lot of leadership experience. And so the practicality of things in a parish, like its finances or business operations, schedule management, can, for a young man with not a lot of life experience, that can seem very overwhelming.
Yeah.
Right. When I was thinking of this a while back, unrelated to your podcast. This had to do with something a couple weeks ago at St. Mark's. When I was 37 years old, 37, I had an operating budget of more than $300 million. When I was 37, my operating budget that I was responsible for, because I was an executive in a tech company, and they have, in the world of publicly traded companies, they have what's chart of accounts, and they have levels of authority. So I was a 37-year-old man, and I could spend $50 million without any signature beyond me required. At $50,001,001, my boss had to sign it. That's crazy.
Crazy.
Because the budget at St. Mark's is $2.5 million, right? And the school's about that. So it's about a $5 million operation at St. Mark's. I spent more on office supplies in the role I had. Not I didn't, but the operation did, in that particular experience in life. So things like budgets and finance, and that's yesterday's news. That's not hard for someone who lived in that world for a long time.
Yeah.
That's not why people come to church either. They don't come for the budgets and the finance.
No.
The purposefulness of St. Mark's is not budget and finance. It's important, but it's not the purpose. Purpose is Jesus Christ, living the life of faith. So a priest doesn't need to have those backgrounds in secular experiences to be a good priest. Nope, because very few of the priests I've been so well served by had that. However, having that can be useful because we're involved, like many of our parishes, involved in some big-time building programs or soon to be, and having some insight or wherewithal in that, it's helpful. Being married is helpful. And not that our marriage was the model marriage. It was a good one as far as I was concerned. Y'all get to heaven, ask her. She has an opinion on this. Ask Jackie. See what she says. I'll tell you it was pretty good. Hopefully she says the same. Yeah, she may say. She may give you that Texas no or something. Who knows? Does it make me a better priest? Not necessarily. What it does do is allow me to enter into the woundedness of a husband or a spouse, a wife, about something that's not healthy or good in a marriage. It helps me to enter into that tension of how couples learn to communicate or dialogue. Yeah. It helps me enter into it a little easier because I lived it. And maybe the entry point is my own self-awareness of things I would do differently given another opportunity. Would I do that differently? Probably a few things. I can think of stuff, the woulda, shoulda, couldas of marriage that help me now be present, whether it's mentoring young ones considering marriage or people currently married working through some stuff. Can I enter into that space with a little more experience that can be helpful? I've hastily thought of analogy of mountain climbing since I lived in my 20s. I lived in the mountains, did a lot of that. It was part of my life, carrying heavy things. I remember when I showed up to my first Marine unit. It's a good way to close because that's how we began. I show up to my first Marine unit. I'm a brand new lieutenant. I have all this new gear. I just come from the supply warehouse. I've got all this issued stuff, all this gear. It's all brand new. Some of it's still in plastic. There's a government label on it. I show up, and there's this sergeant there. His name's Sergeant Richard Knarberg. He's forever seared in my brain, Richard Knarberg. And he's only 5 years older than me, but he's served in the military for those 5 years. So he's been living in the mountains for a couple of years at this point in this expeditionary unit. And I show up brand spanky new. You're called butter bars. You're a second lieutenant. They're gold in color. Hey, butter bars. And they call you LT. So he says, hey, LT, come here. And I've got all my brand new stuff, all my stuff. And he looks at me, and he takes my pack, and he grabs it, opens the top flap, and he dumps out all this stuff on the floor. And there's poncho liners and ponchos and tent halves and tent stakes and all this stuff. He just dumps all of it onto the floor. And he picks up like 3 items. And he says, this is what you're going to need. All the rest of this stuff just gets heavy and wet. You don't want it. Get rid of it. This is what's going to keep you alive.
Whoa.
And he said that because he lived in the mountains and he knew this is what keeps you alive. Okay, what's the analogy? It's, well, I'm not a marriage counselor. I have very little training in that other than seminary. What I can do is sit down with a couple and say, when stuff's getting a little sideways and there's some hurt there, is to ask the probing questions around, well, how do you guys fight? Do you fight? Oh, we never fight. I said, well, then you should.
Yeah.
Learn how. Learn to fight fair and clean, but, don't be hurting each other. But learn communication. That's part of it. NFP teaches that. Learn communication. We spoke of that earlier. So maybe the insights that the Father Mike Rizzos or Father John Mosiers of the world can bring is not any more gifted than these amazing, beautiful priests who never had that. But for the seeker, it may seem more accessible. Go see him.
Yeah,
maybe.
I think so.
There's some of that.
Yeah.
And then some of it may be useful in, here's some things I think you should avoid. Or as a husband, here's some things you should do. I said this at St. Mark's. Men and greeting cards. It's your wife's, it's the anniversary, it's her birthday. Guys are like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to get her. I said, do this. Here you go. This is a pro tip for the guys listening. Here's a pro tip. Go spend the $5 or $6 on these overpriced cards. Go get one. Come on. Get the card. Go home. Get out your scripture. You should be in there frequently, but get out your scripture. Open it up to the Song of Songs. Totally plagiarize Song of Songs. Take an excerpt, couple of verses, put that in the card. Love you, love me, whatever your name is. Give that to her. And it's when she reads those verses and they're to her from your heart in words better than you're going to come up with. You're the best, honey. Okay, that's authentic. Well, so is some of that words of Song of Songs. That is so romantic. And a guy's like, dude, that's awesome. I don't have to come up with this. No, just quote scripture.
Don't just leave the card blank with whatever it says.
Or your name.
Yeah.
Yikes. Quote Song of Songs. You might skip over, your teeth are like the goats of Gilead. You might skip that part. But get to the good parts, because there's lots of them.
Yeah.
Quote it, put it in there. You are my beacon of light that reminds me of the presence of Christ. If it's true, say that. Stuff like that. Okay, that's what as a husband I didn't do enough of, or I did sometimes okay, but other times not. Yeah. Does that make me a better priest? No, not necessarily. But if you think that's going to help you in your marriage, then I have all day. I go, yeah, I'll tell you the story. But closing where my wife leads me is I'm going to tell his story, not my story. My story is interesting. So is yours. What's most interesting is his story.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I think I don't think that we could wrap up in a better place.
Let's wrap up there.
Yeah. So thank you so much.
God bless you, Natalie, and your ministry. Desert wanderings.
Yeah.
We wandered a bit, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Good for us.
Do you want to end in a prayer really quick?
Let's end in a prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and gracious God. You are the telos. You are the goal of all of our lives, is knowing you and loving you, serving you. Every day you give us opportunities in our daily vocations, in our daily walk, You use the sacrament of marriage to bond these two people together. You use the birth of children to help each of us grow in the faith and form them lovingly in your image. Help us to find you every day in our desert wanderings. Help us to see you present in the manifest world, to know you, love you, serve you as we are called. Guide and watch over this ministry, guide and watch over all those listening to this podcast, that this day, this moment of engagement, this moment of encounter helps advance the cause of faith here and throughout the world. Amen.
Amen.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Desert Wanderers. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up as well as subscribe down below. We're produced by Salt and Light Radio, so you can find us on social platforms at Salt and Light Radio or Desert Wanderers Podcast. We produce episodes every week and we launch them for you on Wednesdays. So make sure to tune in for next week's episode and we'll see you then.